Where's Dick? Mike, where's Dick? Ask Mike how's Dick doing, please.
We're just waiting for Dick Farnsworth. Is he here?
He said he's in the room.
Representative Farnsworth had some trouble getting into his room.
All right, can you hear me now?
Who is that?
That would be Gary Drinkwater.
I can hear you, Gary.
All right.
I'm going to ask
Juliet, you look good.
you to hear the echo.
Thank you, Representative Cornfield. Nice to see you.
Do you hear the echo? I'm going to put my earplug buds in and see if I can hear, and let me know if you still hear the echo. I don't think you will, because you won't hear mine.
Are you able to hear me okay?
I can't see what's right here.
Hey, everybody, I'd just like to let you know, excuse me, everybody, we are now being live streamed, so everything that you say is going to be heard by the public. You perhaps would like to mute yourself until we start the meeting.
I care.
I've stopped my. You hear that?
Yeah.
Good morning, Grace. How did the rest of your meeting go?
Went well, thank you. Well attended. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate that.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for your patience while we get settled in. In order to start the Education Committee meeting, we have to have a quorum call, which means I will be taking a roll of those that are present in the committee room. And if you're here, just say yay or present. Okay, so Representative Drinkwater, I believe he's,
Yay.
no, Representative Drinkwater, we're just taking those that are here present in the committee room, and then we'll break, and then we'll have everybody introduce themselves after we break, okay?
Okay.
So if you're not in the room, you don't need, okay, so you don't need to say yay, just for those who are here in the room. Representative Dodge.
Yay.
Representative Fecto. Representative McCray.
Yay.
Senator Carson. Senator Pouliot. Representative Farnsworth.
Yay.
Representative Brennan.
Yes.
Representative Rudnicki. Representative Cornfield.
Here.
And then myself, and that will make a quorum. Okay, thank you, everyone. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, you didn't say? Okay. Representative Ingerson, my apologies.
Yay. Number
There we
7.
go. That's okay. All right, great. So we're going to take a quick break so everyone can go back to the rooms, and then we will resume with introductions from committee members. Okay. So welcome everyone to a meeting of the Joint Standing Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs. Today, we will be receiving a briefing from the Department of Education, sharing with us the experience of our public schools and educators this past spring. And then we will open it up to questions from the committee. Just a couple, one particular piece of information for those folks that are sitting in the same room together. Okay, I would ask also for those of you that are on the meeting to please make sure that you're muted because I can hear somebody, but I can't see who's unmuted. Anyway, so when you are in the room together and you would like to speak, the person that's in the room with you, just temporarily, please mute your computer speaker because we will get feedback. So it's going to take a little bit of coordination for those that are in the same room together. Okay, I'd love to have the committee introduce themselves, and let's start with Representative Drinkwater.
Well, this is a first for me. But, thanks for the invitation to come to Augusta. Representative Drinkwater, District 121.
And then next is Representative Dodge. Representative Dodge.
Good morning, Jan Dodge, House District 97, Belfast, Northport, and Waldo. Good morning.
Representative Secto.
Good morning, Representative Justin Fecto. I represent House District 86, which is West and North Augusta.
Senator Pouliot.
Good morning, State Senator Matt Pouliot, District 15, Augusta, China, Oakland, Sydney, and Vassaboro.
Representative Farnsworth.
Yes, Representative Dick Farnsworth, House District 37, which is a part of Portland.
Representative Brennan.
Michael Brennan, District 36, which is part of Portland.
Representative Rudnicki.
I'm Shelley Rudnicki, House District 108, which is Fairfield, Mercer, and Smithfield. And let me just say that I am unhappy with how this meeting is being held. Thank you.
Representative Ingwerson.
Good morning. So happy to be here. I'm Henry Ingwerson. I represent House District 10, Arundel, Dayton, and Lyman.
Representative Cornfield.
Good morning. So nice to see everybody. I'm Tori Cornfield. I represent House District 125, which is part of Bangor.
Representative Sampson.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Representative Heidi Sampson, representing House District 21. That's Alfred, Limerick, Shapley, Newfield, and Parsonsfield.
And I'm Senator Millette. I represent Senate District 29, which is South Portland, Cape Elizabeth, and part of Scarborough. Oh, I'm so sorry. Representative McCray. I thought I had it all.
That's quite okay. I'm Dave McCray from Fort Fairfield, representing the good people of District 148, and very happy to be here to get information to take back to my constituents. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative McCray, for making the drive all the way down. Really appreciate it. Okay, so again, we are going to receive a briefing from the Department of Education. The commissioner has joined us along with members of her staff in order to make sure that we get all the information that we can get. We have a lot to discuss, and so I am going to make sure that everybody has a chance to ask their question and try to not dwell too long on one particular issue, which would then prevent us from moving on to others. So with that, Commissioner, I will turn it over to you.
Good morning, Madam Chairs and esteemed members of the Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs. We are very glad to be here with you today, with you virtually at least, to share our work throughout this period of the civil emergency related to COVID-19. And I wanted to let you know that we've created sort of a deck of slides that would help keep us organized in sharing with you what has transpired thus far. And we were careful to touch on many of, if not all of the areas in which you had questions. We were grateful to receive those questions ahead of time. And we worked as a team for the past couple of days to ensure that we have thorough responses for you and that we have as much first person information as possible, which is why I have my team here ready to answer any other in-depth or detailed questions that you have. We thought if it's okay, we would go through the slides, we would give you the overview, and in the context of that, we would bring specialists from the department up. They would share their detailed information. And if you had submitted a question and would like to ask it on camera and directly, if it were incompletely answered within the context of this presentation, we'll pause at each section for you to have discussion or questions. Does that seem like it would work well for you?
Actually, I think what we'd like to do is have you go through your presentation so we make sure we get through all of it, and then we'll open up for questions. Okay, we won't pause for questions in between, but all right, here we go. So again, thanks for being here. We at the department have been very busy in the past really year and a half. In January, we shared with all of you that we had developed a strategic plan. Our year one strategic priorities really focused heavily on building positive, trustful relationships with the field. And that has played out in a really positive way in the context of a global pandemic and a statewide emergency, because we felt that the folks in the field, the stakeholders and the public, were able to view Department of Education as a reliable, trustworthy, and there for them source of support and information. So I think it helped us to lay some of the groundwork to be successful in, at least in relation to where other states are right now. One of the things that we started very early on, it was sometime last summer, we established the Maine School Safety Center using a federal grant and repurposing it and redesigning it. The Maine School Safety Center is directed by Jonathan Shapiro, and I'd like to invite Jonathan to share with you a little bit more about that. And Chelsea, you can forward to the next slide.
Hi, this is Jonathan Shapiro. Can you hear me all right? Okay. Yep, my name is Jonathan Shapiro. I'm the acting director of the Maine School Safety Center. I'd like to thank the committee for this opportunity to present to you what the Maine School Safety Center has done in response to the COVID-19 crisis and what we've accomplished since we last submitted a report to you back in February of this year. I am pleased to report that we've been able to stay on track with our strategic plan. We've been able to accomplish all of the timeline as laid out in that plan. Immediately upon the advent of leading up to COVID-19, we were able to solidify the Maine School Safety Center as a department, a separate department within the Department of Education. We crafted some language to that effect, so it is now a separate entity within the Department of Education. When COVID-19 arose on the horizon and we realized we were going to have to be nimble enough to respond to that, we expedited our hiring process because we knew that we were going to need the expertise of emergency operation planning officer and our mental health and threat assessment officer. And we were able to accomplish that in a fairly quick amount of time. One of the initial outreaches that we did was to advise the school districts that we were there for them, and that we encouraged all of them to review their emergency operation plans, and particularly review their infectious disease emergency operation plan. And if they needed any assistance with that, to let us know. We also led on the national stage as well as here locally when we realized that traditional schooling was going to revert to a remote setting, what traditionally we'd be dealing with in the school setting and the in-school environment was now a home safety issue. How do we protect 180,000 students that were no longer in school but were actually at home? And there are risks associated, unfortunately, to a certain degree, with children being at home. So we immediately decided that we would brush off our remote teaching skills, and we developed a series of Zoom sessions, instructional sessions to the stakeholders, predominantly school staff, emergency managers, police, first responders, on a number of issues. And those issues range from home safety, again, a tutorial on what does it look like to be safe at home, and some of the concerns there. We also noted that there was a drop in child abuse reporting, so we did a segment on how do you address child abuse in the remote learning environment. We also stressed home disaster planning. Students have disaster drills in schools, and we certainly encouraged the stakeholders to reach out to the families and encourage them to practice disaster drills in their own home to make their homes as safe as possible. We also had generated a discussion with the various police organizations within the state about what their role would be in the remote learning setting. Again, realizing that a lot of our students that were at home had underlying mental health challenges and emotional challenges, and then this isolation just seemed to exasperate that, or could exasperate that. And we wanted to assure that if there was a need for police involvement, that was a thoughtful process. School resource officers or juvenile officers around the state would be sensitive to those issues. And what we wanted to encourage was that if there was police interaction, that the officer that was interacting with the family was specifically trained for interacting with youth, had a good understanding of the juvenile justice system and the developmentally appropriate interactions with youth. We also had several sessions on mental health, what to watch for those that already had mental health concerns, but also with the advent of COVID-19 and the isolation and the disruption, there was generalized concern over the mental health of the families, mental health, even school staff, but particularly mental health of students. And we also did a session on cyber threats, which again, now that everybody was on a remote platform, it was a concern to us that many of the firewalls and the safety protections that schools have that are not there in the home, and that children would be could be laid victim to cyber threats through the online platform. And we also conducted emergency operation planning seminar, and we're doing that also this summer. We're having an 8-part series of emergency operation planning for our schools and stakeholders. And this is predominantly to lay the strong foundation for them to be able to enact the framework that the DOE has put out. And a large part of that is a 6-step process that we go over to make sure that the schools understand that process. And an essential component of that is the collaborative school planning teams. And these are teams that are multidisciplinary teams made up of subject matter experts or people that have experience in that, and they actually work on the planning process. And we at the Maine School Safety Center has offered to facilitate that process in partnership with county and local EMA personnel. And those are essential, again, to have multiple viewpoints in planning. And I can't stress enough, and we stress in the program, why this is important, because without a foundational understanding of emergency operation planning, you're really in a reactionary mode and you're not really thoughtfully approaching whatever crisis is at hand. So this is primary and it's foundational for the school districts to be able to have a strong understanding of the process of planning. And the process in and of itself is important, because particularly in this current environment that we're in, where it changes, that information changes regularly, it gives you the flexibility to the mental flexibility to adapt quickly and to adjust to changing information that comes out. Another series that we're putting on this summer, again, being very much concerned about cyber issues, is we are putting on a 4-part series that addresses cyber crimes to include human and sex trafficking, sextortion, cyberbullying, and whatnot. Again, predominantly to our stakeholders so they can impart that knowledge onto the school settings. So again, the School Safety Center is on track to meet the strategic plan that we outlaid back in February. We immediately hired 2 critical staff, which was the emergency operation officer and the threat assessment officer. And we are on track now to hire to complete hiring for our staff. So we'll have a complete staff roster, hopefully within the next month. And then we'll be in position to fulfill the rest of the plan as laid out and on track. One last thing I wanted to mention, again, indicating that COVID has not slowed us down. We have created a threat assessment committee, working committee, to research models of threat assessment for the state of Maine. And we have obtained 1 pilot school, and we're looking for 2 other pilot schools to work with us to pilot these programs. Once we've researched them and decide which one we think works best for the state of Maine, we'll do an analysis on that, and then we'll do some training and implementation to get that on the state. So again, I thank you for this opportunity, and I'll be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I really appreciate all the work you guys have been doing. And I think some of the most valuable work right now related to the COVID-19 situation. I'm getting a weird, now I'm muted. Sorry about that. Oh, I'm muted by the host. Alt-A to unmute.
Looks unmuted now.
Hello?
Commissioner, you're fine.
Hi.
We hear you
Great.
just fine.
Sorry, I was hearing multiple versions of myself talking. Sorry. So anyway, one thing I really want to highlight is that these collaborative planning teams that will include teachers, school staff, facilities specialists, school nurses, and health professionals, along with superintendents and school leaders, they are all going to be trained by Jonathan's team to respond and to ensure safe environments when we return to in-person instruction. So we're really grateful that we had this set of resources ahead of time, and so getting that. Can you show yours off, maybe?
Yeah, mine is off.
Sorry. Anyhow, next slide would be that we have been working hard to stay ahead of the emergency. Back in very early March, the Department of Education started to set up a web page specific to the COVID-19 situation. It has been one of our most frequently visited pages ever, maybe of all time. We have doubled viewership on the department's website in general, and the COVID-19 webpage has tens of thousands of views that span across the United States and into Canada. Chelsea, if you would click the link so they could take a quick peek, because if you're able, committee members, to share with your constituents that this is a very useful resource in terms of resources for schools. Up at the top, no, back down a little bit, Chelsea. Yeah, up at the top on the left in a blue button is resources for schools, but then there's a whole set of resources for parents. And other caregivers. I don't know why, but I'm hearing are you hearing me talk?
I don't know why.
you turn yours off?
It is on.
All right, sorry
So
about
Commissioner, we're fine here. I suspect you are getting feedback because maybe Mary's computer is not, you've got two computers in the same room and one of you is
that. We
speaking.
unfortunately
The
do.
other
Yeah, I
person
think,
needs to turn off
unfortunately
their.
do. Yeah, I think, I'm gonna. Okay. Okay. I think I got it. I'm so sorry. So yeah, I guess I just point out that our resources have been so valued by the field, by educators in Maine, across the nation, and even in Canada, that we, the nation, and even in Canada again, that we are. What are we doing? I'm losing track of my. What are we doing? Oh my gosh! Now there's 5 of me. I'm not sure what to do about my audio because it's almost impossible to hear myself a whole sentence after.
Okay, Commissioner?
Yes.
Commissioner, can you hear me?
I'm going to log out and log back in if that's okay.
Because so, Commissioner, at the beginning of the meeting, I shared with folks that if you are in the room with somebody else on this Zoom meeting and you're speaking, their speaker. And also,
Want me to jump on?
Chelsea.
Jump on.
See. If you would excuse me, I'm going to log out and log back in, and I will have one computer. I'm going to log out and log back in, and I will have one computer. Be right back.
okay, I've also heard that folks are getting feedback from our committee room. So I'm just testing now, and if somebody could let me know if that's fixed, that would appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I'm back. And hi, everybody. Sorry, I'm back. And I still have a. Oops. All right. Chelsea, have you been able to scroll through while I've been muted? And
No.
Is the meeting frozen? Nope. At any rate, we'll go to the next slide. Sorry about, oh, we can go to the next slide.
No,
Chelsea.
we're fine. We're just waiting.
Gotcha. All right. So I guess I wanted to point out that in addition to providing great resources for families who have been resources for families who have to provide high quality school experiences for their children while they've been at home, and also providing great resources for educators and for mental health professionals and for a variety of other reasons. Mental health professionals. We were written up in the New York Times and highlighted on PBS NewsHour as being an exemplary Department of Education in terms of resources. Those did include live consulting sessions with DOE specialists. All right, next slide. Slide. You should let them know how intense it is.
And so everything is repeating.
So the we can continue past ahead of the emergency. We can continue past ahead of the emergency. We met with the governor's office, with the CDC, with superintendents, met with the governor's office, with the CDC, with superintendents, in preparation for what was clearly an impending emergency situation. For what was clearly an impending emergency situation. Did declare a state of civil emergency. Oh, you are having the echo as well. A state of civil emergency. Oh, you are having the echo as well.
Yes.
Sorry.
Commissioner, if Mary is in the room, can you just ask her to step out and see if it's better if she's not in the room with you?
Sure. She has her computer completely off. Sure. She has. You know what I'm going to do? I might go. I can do this
It's
from.
completely off and it's still echoing.
You know what I'm going to do? I might go. I can do this from. All right. Let's see. What's this? All right, let's see. What's this? I'm gonna look into my audio microphone. I've never had to look into my audio microphone. I've never had this problem ever. I'm gonna try on someone else's computer. I'm just gonna turn this one off. I'm sorry. I'm gonna go out. I'm gonna try on someone else's computer. I'm just gonna turn this one off. I'm sorry. I'm gonna go out one more time.
Commissioner Macon has asked that I carry on while she gets on a new computer. If you can hear me and there is not an echo, please just write it in the chat because I don't want to continue to have the same problem and not be very useful. So I'll just wait to hear from one of you and we'll move forward if we don't have feedback. Okay, so we are going to keep going. Commissioner Macon, what she was talking about a bit earlier was as the crisis occurred, our most important needs were to make sure that children were cared for and that they had food and the needs while they were learning from home. And so at that time, our child nutrition office stepped in immediately and within 3 days was able to support school districts across the state to switch over from the National Lunch Program to the summer program. And what that allowed us to do was to have several hundred sites serving families and students and kiddos so that they would receive child nutrition. And I'm going to hand it over to our director, Walter Beasley.
And also I'm back and think I have no echo.
Okay.
Thank
Well,
you. Thanks, Chelsea.
Would you like me to go back, Commissioner, or do you want to move forward?
Please keep going forward.
Okay, Walter, I'm going to mute myself and I'm going to move the slide for you.
All right. Good morning, everybody. It's a time of challenges and adventures and learning, I guess is a good way to put it. My name is Walter Beasley. I've met most of you in the past. I've been here a few years, about 34 years in child nutrition doing different positions. So I've seen a lot and nothing like this. One thing that we really emphasize or really stress here in our office is communication. We want to address good customer service, and we've done a number of things to do that. I will say the Saturday that this adventure broke loose, I was on my computer Saturday morning answering questions to district directors, and then all of a sudden more staff appeared. By the end of the day, I had a lot of my staff online. I had my finance person online, and people were getting some results. And as a result of that, in 3 days, they switched from the National Lunch Program to a summer program, which is different meal pattern, different regulations. They have to put an application in, they have to put a site form in. We had all that. 75% of the districts were up and running in that short time. So all the work in the local field is really paying off to our kids. As far as communication, we do a weekly webinar. It used to be every Monday. It moved to Wednesday, so we can call it Walter's Wednesday webinars. But that webinar is anything that changes during the week before. Things change fast. I will say the handout that you have in front of you that said we had 32 responses as of 15 minutes ago, it's now 34 responses. That's how fast this is changing. And all the changes are to the benefit of the children. Every national waiver that has come to Maine, we've accepted. We've actually asked for more waivers over and above the national ones, and been successful in getting those waivers as well. So there's, besides the Monday meeting, which is now Wednesday, we do a Thursday meeting. The Thursday meeting is for, it's a Zoom meeting, and it's a conversation. It's not a lecture. I have probably 86 people on an average that attend. And that meeting is just to discuss where we're seeing problems, what we need to think about in the future, what we need to do as far as USDA and how we can help each other in doing this. The local schools are very comfortable calling our office and talking to us. Like I said, over the weekend, that weekend in particular, emails everywhere. I had phone messages on my work phone. I had people calling on my cell phone at home. And I also had someone show up at the door. So people are very comfortable talking to us, which is a great thing. So that's great. All our webinars that we do are recorded, so they can look at them anytime they want. Besides the webinars I do, we have a chef here that's doing presentations on different packaging, different ideas for meals, because every community, every county, every school is different. You have the ones that are rural, you have to address one way. You have the in-town ones that you can address a different way. Meals are being delivered by mobile unit. It could be a bus. It could be a van. They could be in front of a school passing meals out. It could be location like City Hall or a parking lot where there's a supermarket. It could be a number of places. But we didn't put them there. I take that back. The local school districts put sites wherever they could to maximize the flexibility for parents or child to get their meals. The other thing that's happening in Maine that is not as well known as popular is called the Baylor Project, which is actually mail meals to rural households. If you think of, I think it's Blue Ribbon or one of those meal programs where the meals come and you prepare them at home, it's the same idea. They get 10 days of meals in a box. It comes through US Mail or UPS for that family. The district has to apply for it, and there's a lot of procedures to start it, but we have some districts that are doing that currently. The other thing that just recently started is what they call pandemic EBT card, which means that they're getting if they have a SNAP card, extra benefits are added onto that card, or if they're not getting SNAP benefits and they're free and reduced, they get what they call a white card, which gives them benefits for the summer program as well. And the benefit of that program is they get the PEBT card, but they also can still participate in the summer program and pick up meals. And the meals are for any child. It doesn't matter what their age. They just show up and no identification, no paperwork, and they get a meals. So that's working that way. The meals by regs are supposed to be picked up by the child or by the parent by the waiver. The meals are for the child, so it's important to make sure the child gets that meal. We're really concerned with food safety, making sure that whatever is provided to the family is provided in a family way, is provided in sanitation, temperature control, and things like that. That's why it's important when meals are delivered that someone is there to accept the meals. Meals that the other option we do with meals is called bulk delivery, which we allow 5 to 7 days worth of meals to be put in a box. And that means that we send a loaf of bread instead of 5 sandwiches. We send a box of cereal instead of 5 little boxes of cereal. We send a half-gallon milk versus cartons of milk. So that's allowed and working in some locations. That saves on storage space in the home refrigerator. It saves on packaging, and it saves on some of the items schools have a hard time getting because everybody wants individual packaging. So by going to like the quarts of milk, it took a little pressure off the half pints. In the bulk packages is included 2 things. One thing that has to be included is the directions on how to prepare the meal, or how to prepare the sandwich, or how to prepare the breakfast. So what is in the box? I know what it's used for and how to use it. The other thing in the box is how to store it. Milk goes in the refrigerator, the bread goes on the counter, where it might be, but we want to make sure it's clear to everybody how to handle that audit. Other webinars that we do, on site, and things like that. Looking towards the future, what's going to happen? The waiver for flexibility of eligibility sites ends June 30th. We got a USDA extension of the sites that already exist to extend to August 31st. So that's a good thing. So anyone that's a site now can continue to August 31st, and they don't have to worry about qualifying as far as site eligibility. Site eligibility, just a simple overall statement, is anything, a site has to be 50% or more free and reduced to be eligible. With the waiver, it's just anybody that wants to participate. So you have the Yarmouths and the Falmouths, the RSU 35 Elliots, all can participate using this method. So they can all continue to August 31st. The mealtime waiver also continues August 31st, which allows us to serve breakfast and lunch at the same time. Instead of making the parent come for breakfast, then coming back for lunch, they can get breakfast, lunch at the same time. The mealtime flexibility allows us to use deliver 3 breakfasts at one time, 3 lunches at one time. It allows for the bulk meal. So that's what the mealtime flexibility does. And the biggest one that we were really worried about was a non-congregate feeding. Under the summer program, children are required to eat the meal on site. And that obviously would work in this situation. So the non-congregate feeding allows for students, children, take the meal and eat it at a remote location at home where it might be. And most of these waivers apply to all 3 of our programs. We have the Child Adult Care Food Program, which is some of your daycare centers and some of your home providers. And it also covers the summer food service program, and they also cover the National Lunch Program. We have a few that are still operating the National Lunch Program. They're residential programs that are still participating. They are still going on the National Lunch Program. The rest of them switched to summer. Summer is an easier meal pattern and a better reimbursement. So that's what we encouraged them to do. We took all the districts in Maine, divided up between the staff here, and we made calls and connected with every one of them to help if we could, to give them some direction and guidance and help them make a decision. Most of them jumped on board. A few decided to do their own thing, which is fine. But that's basically where we are as far as our program. It's the people in the field are doing a great job. More worried about burnout, and they just want to help as much as they can. And I can't emphasize the great job they're doing in the pictures and the stories I hear. My wife happened to ride the school bus, passing meals out to kids, and she said, "You'll never have that experience again." So I will leave now and wait for later for your questions. Thank you very much for your time. Have a great day.
Thanks so much, Walter. I'm sure there'll be questions for you near the end on this. So another way in which we responded once the pandemic did begin to show community transmission across the state and we had to stop in-person instruction in March, we activated our Office of Innovation to provide the necessary supports for students and teachers and families at home who were trying to all partner together to provide educational continuity in an emergency situation. So welcome Paige Nichols and Beth Lambert.
Thank you, Pender. As part of our effort to support continuity of learning during the suspension of classroom-based instruction, We're getting a little bit of echo feedback. We partnered with the Department of Economic and Community Development, Financial Services, the National Digital Equity Center, and members of Senator King's staff to develop a plan for providing universal connectivity to Maine students, which was identified by stakeholders as the highest priority in removing barriers to remote education. Is anyone else hearing an echo? Shall I continue, or is it very hard for people to hear? Is anyone else hearing an echo? Shall I continue for people to hear? I'll go on. Although Maine educators and educational leaders have demonstrated extraordinary commitment and creativity in response to sudden changes in traditional instruction, specific circumstances caused by COVID-19 made it prohibitively difficult for them to offer equitable online learning opportunities without individual student internet access. On March 16th, we conducted our first statewide needs assessment through a survey that went out to all building principals, tech directors, and superintendents. Recognizing the extreme pressures placed on administrators last spring, we issued the survey 3 additional times in an effort to identify and fulfill 100% of the statewide needs. The survey asked administrators to report on 3 main data points. In order for your students to participate in online remote learning opportunities, how many of them need A, only a device, B, only internet, and C, both a device and internet. We also asked which cellular service provider is most reliable in each district so that we could align them with the strongest cellular service connection for wireless connectivity using a cellular service solution. In order to fulfill the needs as quickly as possible so that students had equitable opportunities to participate in remote learning for the remainder of the school year, we worked with procurement specialists at the Department of Administrative and Financial Services to secure inventory and place orders. With the existing infrastructure of the Maine Learning Technology Initiative, Maine was uniquely positioned to efficiently deploy and manage Wi-Fi and associated devices to SAUs. Our team has supported technology directors throughout the process to guarantee efficient distribution to students, and our digital learning specialists have been available for professional learning for teachers and administrators. Many of us have also personally delivered devices to schools when orders were mistakenly redirected to the cross building. To date, we have fulfilled the reported needs of 503 of the 582 schools that received the survey. We are currently reaching out individually to the remaining 79 schools that we have not yet heard from in the first 4 surveys. Our goal, of course, is to meet 100% of the statewide needs for connectivity. Funding for this initiative was made possible first through charitable donations from both the philanthropic and business communities, a contribution from the Connect Maine Authority, and later with the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Funds through the CARES Act. This effort has ensured that all students have opportunities to continue learning through online platforms regardless of geography or socioeconomic status. Looking ahead, we're working with Adult Ed, the University of Maine system, the Maine Community College system to support their highest priority connectivity needs. We're also working with staff from Senator King's office and across state agencies to explore and seek permanent solutions to the inequities associated with lack of internet connectivity, particularly so that students can participate in remote learning in the future. Lastly, I want to mention the learning space, which was another one of our efforts to provide students with opportunities for continued learning. The learning space was a collaboration between Maine DOE, Educate Maine, and Maine Public Television, with advisory partners from Maine Curriculum Leaders Association, Maine Administration of Services for Children with Disabilities, Maine School Management Association, Maine State Teachers of the Year Association, National Board Certified Teachers of Maine, Maine Principals Association, and Maine Education Association. The learning space provided teacher-prepared content for an hour of Maine Public Television programming every weekday from April 27th to June 12th. Over 40 episodes were aired and are now archived on the Maine DOE website. Maine Public is currently gathering television viewer information and web analytics to show how frequently this resource is accessed. The feedback we've heard from parents is that this program provided high quality content that felt personal because it was prepared by Maine teachers from across the state. This effort was made possible by support from the philanthropic and business communities, and especially by the incredible teachers who spent many hours creating engaging lessons. I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Beth Lambert, who has been co-leading a lot of the continuity of learning efforts with me. Thank you.
Thanks, Paige. Hi, I just wanted to continue to build on the resources provided this fall that Paige began to share about. Since March 16th, our Department of Education content specialists have provided over 12,000 contact hours of professional learning for Maine educators. We've been working to ensure that those hours were meaningful and relevant to our educators as things progress since March. From beginning providing listening and support early on to educators who were just coping with the reality of educating students exclusively remotely, most for the first time, to then as educators began to get their footing, we shifted to providing support for specific skills needed to provide meaningful learning experiences, as was requested by the field. We continued to move and adapt and be responsive to growing to actually partnering with those educators as educators do, quickly getting on board and figuring some of this out. Many partnered with us to share through our platform what they'd learned and ways they've been able to best reach students. So these 12,000 contact hours were provided live, but we recorded these sessions, so they're all housed in a library on our website. and they can continue to be a resource to educators at any time throughout this crisis and any other needs in the future. As the school year is pretty much ended for just about everybody, we're preparing to continue to support the field and adapt and be responsive throughout the summer and beyond. We're excited that currently it's happening. We have a remote learning 101 series that's provided by our DOE digital learning specialists. This is a 12-part series that provides support for all things remote learning, from the very beginnings that an educator might need to the very in-depth consideration and skills that will be required once they are more and more comfortable with providing remote learning. That, like all of our other professional learning we provide, is recorded and will be available to educators who aren't able to attend live. In addition to this series, to help us prepare for the uncertainty of the fall, the department is developing a custom web-based platform to house project-based, integrated, Maine learning results aligned modules. The platform will provide students with a dynamic and active learning experience where they can select a module that will span multiple content areas. The platform will provide Maine students with the ability to continue and enhance their learning in an anytime, anywhere format. It will offer rigorous, asynchronous learning modules that students can access as they need and progress through their own pace. We had over 400 educators respond to our call to work with us to develop these modules, which is quite impressive considering the school year they just finished. And we're so grateful and excited that by fall, we'll have a quarter's worth of a school year's content ready and available to all students and educators to use in the best way they see fit. We plan to collect feedback once the site launches in the fall so that we can continue to grow and improve and work to build out the remaining content over the rest of the school year. Speaking of the fall and beyond, the MLTI Advisory Board, as we've talked about in this live venue before, continues to meet. We've met 6 times since January. 4 of those 6 times have been remote, but we're learning and adapting to this new way of meeting. And as MLTI, we are proud to be leading the way in remote meetings, all-day remote meetings, to be engaging and interactive. Speaking of leading, as I hope you saw a few weeks ago, we in MLTI moved our student conference, which usually has over 1,000 students and educators who gather in person at the University of Maine, to a virtual conference to invite students to engage in learning related to technology. And it was so excited and so successful and energizing in a very difficult time. One student even commented that she wished this was how school always was. Anyway, sorry, back to the advisory board. We're on schedule to release our recommendation by October. Summaries of all of our board meetings and other relevant information regarding this work can be found on our website. As you can imagine, in our meetings since March, we've been working to adapt and be responsive to the new needs of education in this COVID environment and what the needs will be in the fall and beyond. And so that has shifted our conversations a bit, but always, as MLTI has been since its inception in 2000, committed and dedicated to this question, to this issue around equity and how do we provide equity for student access to learning through technology. So with that, I think I'll hand it back to our commissioner.
Thank you so much, Beth and Paige and Mary Herman, all 3 of whom have contributed great things to this effort for continuity of learning. Now, one of the biggest challenges we've had in our emergency style remote learning across the state, of course, has been with respect to special education. And so we're very fortunate to have our new-ish director, Erin Fraser, who has been working tirelessly directly with educators and with families and family groups and advocacy groups and special ed administrators throughout this entire emergency time to provide high quality professional development and technical support. So Erin, if you want to take it from here.
Thank you, everyone. and good morning. So I'm Erin Fraser, the Director of Special Education and Special Services, Birth to 20. So we had the daunting task of trying to support our most vulnerable students during this remote learning experience. And so very early on, we knew that we would have to mobilize our team in a way that was never before done. Obviously, no one has endured this before. So early on, the Federal Office of Special Education Programs, which we refer to as OSEP, identified 2 technical assistance centers, one for 3 to 20-year-olds, which is considered Part B, and one for Part C, to work in conjunction with the U.S. Department of Education to make sure that we were prioritizing these students and providing what was necessary in a remote context, learning while we were doing it. So initially, they put out the 4 priorities that we have kind of been guided by through this experience in all of that we have done. These priorities have maintained throughout the massive amount of resources that have been offered through us through a national platform. So the priorities are listed here. The first priority was really to just focus on safety, health, and welfare of students and staff members, of all people in communities. So we definitely had that as a focus. That was the focus of all the work we did. The second priority was to provide FAPE, which is free appropriate public education. FAPE is essentially access to the same experience that general education students have, with the provision of how to provide special education to access your education. So our message to the field generally was provide as much as you can, as reasonably as you can, in the best way that you know how. And so this was an amazing effort for all of our teachers to try to understand how to take the intent of the IEP and deliver it in a context that wasn't ever imagined before. The third priority was to document your efforts and to make sure that the documentation was focused, consistent, and detailed, to demonstrate really that what you were doing was trying to provide your best opportunity for students to access their education and make educational progress. And the fourth statement that was loud and clear is that IDEA was not built for a pandemic. So we weren't expecting any waivers or continuations. We have a lot of timelines and a lot of compliance issues that we focus on when we talk about free appropriate public education. And none of the guidelines that we formally use to provide services applied in this context. So we mobilized our team and almost immediately started providing a massive amount of professional development and technical assistance to the field. I can echo what Beth said. Initially, it started to be just kind of supporting people moving forward. And then it became more nuanced and in depth as we moved down and people became more comfortable with this context. People were sending us our videos. We were giving feedback on how to provide this instruction. And so it changed and morphed, and we've done also particular series based on information from the field and specific issues and challenges that we were working with. So we also partnered with the National Technical Assistance Centers. I partnered with Northeast special education directors for their departments of education and national organizations to just kind of all of us understand and figure this out at the same time as we're providing it. So it was a really big challenge, and I'm really proud of my team for the amount of professional development we offered. We started out every day of the week. We met with teachers and provided targeted professional development that included ed techs as well. But we provided that assistance 5 hours a week starting on March 18th. We had met with them every day for 1 hour. And then toward the end of our content, we had 2 hours per day for a special remote educational experience around data management. I provided 2 hours of technical assistance to the special education administrators, again, filtering all that was happening nationally and information, really important information and guidance that we were getting from OSEP. We provided 2 hours a week of special technical assistance to special purpose private schools who have a very different role in this pandemic. And they they have the same role that we all do, but they have very special populations that we're dealing with. So we wanted to give particular support to those schools. So they had 2 hours a week of professional development. We also developed ed tech professional development. We continue to support preschool contracted providers through meetings and school psychologists, school business managers, hearing officers, mediators, and complaint investigators. So all of these individual stakeholder groups that involve special education were provided support. And then we created specific professional development to, as I mentioned before, educational technicians, including training on behavior management and remote learning, PBIS, positive behavior.
Oh, and she froze. Erin, I think you froze at this point. Can everybody still hear me okay?
Your intervention systems.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you know what, Erin? We realized we are going a little bit over. If there's any important highlight to just like get out there quickly, we're going to need to move a little bit more quickly, I think, through our remainder of our presentation.
Well, I can just say, I'll just finish it up then. Special education, or if you visit our resource page that we developed for COVID, it's amazing, rich resources targeted for teachers, administrators, and parents. And then finally, that we have provided new guidance around potentially providing some in-person services for non-impacted community spread counties. I'm sure there'll be more questions about that. I'll end there. Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much, Erin. I really appreciate that. And we're going to move very quickly through the remainder of these. We realize that it's taken a little bit of extra time. So we have our Office of School and Student Supports, who Rich Meserve and Bear Shea, who provided a lot of ongoing technical assistance and training and professional development in mental health. And that's for teachers, for school leaders, and for families at home, and also social emotional learning, etc. And so I think is it Rich and Bear? Would you please quickly, I'm sorry to cut you short, but we just want to make sure you hit your highlights and then we're going to keep going.
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner. Am I on? Excellent. So yeah, I'll just call my responses down. I just want to say how proud I am of our team. I'm proud of the entire DOE team, but certainly the Office of School and Student Supports. We are really focused on making sure that we're providing the best support and guidance that we can to school personnel, to students, to families. What this crisis has done to all of us has really necessitated all of us coming together to provide as much support as possible. Our team works with both health and physical education, school nursing, as Pender noted, social emotional learning. We have equity, family engagement, student homelessness, mental health. All these pieces are coming together. We're doing collaborative work with other state agencies, the leadership agencies in the state, partnering with as many people on the floor as we can to share our work on equity and diversity amongst the different teams and the offerings that are going out to the field. So we're really proud of what we're doing. We're providing our resources on our website in many languages to ensure that families are connecting to the information that we're providing. Really just trying to blanket the state with as much support and guidance as we can. So, sort of transitioning on into maybe some more of the specific mental health and social emotional pieces, I'll pass it off to my colleague, Bear Shea.
Hello, everyone. Can you guys all hear me? Great. My name is Bear Shea. I am the mental health and school counselor specialist for the DOE, and I am a clinical social worker. And I think just knowing that mental health will be significantly impacted due not just to the physical effects of the COVID virus, but also due to the effects of social distancing, closing of jobs, and our school buildings. We really wanted to use best practices and research from past crisis and mental health response. And so the O3S team worked quickly in developing and providing supports to bolster mental health for all students while simultaneously working to create awareness and resources for our most vulnerable populations. Primary area of concern was to provide direct support and resources to educators as many schools quickly moved to remote learning models and creating an awareness of the many different ways students and their families needed to be supported. So this included mental health and trauma resources, working with the Maine Educators Association to present on town halls for trauma prevention for students. And really a significant piece was over 4,000 contact hour certificates in clinical mental health prevention, response, and then school supports, school counseling, student homelessness, and work with migrant students, and a significant amount of social emotional learning content area. Another important area was to create and provide guidance to the field. So how to use telehealth for mental health support, as well as manage behavior in virtual classrooms. Guidance to the field for developing new mental health crisis plans and bereavement plans to prepare for how we would share information should the worst case scenarios of student or staff passing be related to COVID while we're in this virtual community. And now looking forward to supporting schools in the use of federal funding as they plan to add best practice mental health supports, as well as just creating a library of recorded mental health professional development resources and resources for students and their families as well around mental health. And those resources include suicide prevention, resources for LGBTQ students, looking for ways to support equity. And then one of the, as we continue to identify and provide supports for student mental health, we found that through our many content sessions with educators, we began to hear from them how COVID crisis was having a significant impact on their mental health as well. And I think it's important to note our educators are in a unique situation during this crisis, as they not only carry the burden of keeping their own families safe in this uncertain time, but also because of their caring relationships and as key supports for students. They're also aware of the impacts of COVID-19 on their students and their families, which adds a unique additional load for our educators. And so in response to the brave task of our educators that they've taken on in providing continuity for our students, we work to sort of bolster the efforts through creating programs specifically for educators. And that includes creating a time at the beginning and ending of each weekday, specifically focused on supports using brain-based emotional supports for educators. And that had over 4,700 participants. And that was every single day, beginning and end of the day, as well as just ongoing content sessions, providing stress management and resources for educators, and a conversation, a recorded conversation that educators can access for addressing loss and grief that they might be feeling. Another one of the important resources that has risen to the top in supporting students is the availability and use of social emotional learning curriculum. And in Maine, the opioid task force created by the governor came up with findings that SEL is indicated as a best practice prevention for reducing drug use and reducing mental health barriers. And so prior to the COVID-19 crisis, the commissioner had tasked us with developing a statewide SEL curriculum that would be best practice informed to address the unique needs of our state, while also being free and easily accessible to our schools. And with the COVID-19 crisis, this task has become even more important as we look towards planning for supporting students this fall.
Sarah, thank you so much. And I'm sure you'll be here for questions following the presentation. And you guys have just done amazing work. Thank you. I think I would next want to let you all know that throughout all of this, we have engaged the voices of stakeholders from across a variety of groups, and we will later in your questioning provide you with all of the specifics around that. However, generally speaking, we had educators and students and family members and parent advocacy and so forth contributing to all of our decision making. Part of this helped us to be ready early on with the most primary objectives that we had when the emergency hit. That would be 100% student access to the internet. The next one was the online learning platform that you heard from Beth. And the third was leveraging inherent opportunities. In every crisis, there are so many opportunities for innovation and for change. And so we began working on this very early so that when federal resources and other opportunities came along, we were more ready than others. I'm going to introduce Chelsea Fortin-Trimble to describe the CARES Act, and she won't brag about this herself, but she, not single-handedly, but she certainly led the charge that allowed Maine to be ready to apply for and receive all of the possible federal resources within days of those being available. And we know for a fact that some states still haven't even gotten their applications together. And we've done a very good job in accessing the provisions that we could for our schools. So Chelsea, take it away. I'm wondering if Chelsea, if you're, start talking if you're not muted, Chelsea. I can't see you, but essentially the emergency response and securing resources to the CARES Act. Yeah, we were, so the first thing we went after was the governor's emergency education relief funding. That was able to support the Connect Every Child, the hashtag Get Kids Connect, the Connect Kids Now effort. And in as you heard, 84% of Maine schools had students who had no access to the internet. Since receiving that funding, we've so far been able to connect 100% of needs as identified. Then we found the, is Chelsea, you not there? No.
I'm here.
Oh, good. Go for it.
Commissioner, may I? Okay. So as Commissioner said, the day that the applications were released, we had a planning team across the department. Every leader of federal programs is on that team. And so we were working with the commissioner to determine what the priorities were, but also to try to preemptively complete an application that the U.S. Department of Education had not actually created or released. And so that is why Maine was able to get out ahead so quickly. And we are already releasing CARES Act ESSER funds, elementary and secondary education emergency relief, to Maine SAUs. And so we have over 20 districts that have applied and received approval, which means they have a grant award notification and they have met with their stakeholders and they're now able to seek reimbursement. And so Maine has $43.7 million. We're really pleased how quickly we're able to move. We also have many districts that are focusing on mental health, social emotional learning, remote learning, blended models, as well as summer programming. So because we're able to move quickly, many districts are now able to address those needs immediately and get that reimbursement that they need at this time. I also just want to also mention that at that very same time, our ESEA team was able to incentivize summer school programming by reallocating some federal funds that were also available through Title I. So that ESER team meets with the field. We were meeting daily for several weeks. We've now moved back to once a week, which means we meet with the ESER leads at the SAU level, as well as the business office. And we are also about to engage in a very exciting time with a competitive grant. I'm going to hand that back to Commissioner Macon, and she'll tell you a little bit more about the REM grant.
Thanks, Chelsea. Yeah, so as part of the Education Stabilization Act, there is $300 million at the federal government that's being offered in competitive grants. I think it's highly competitive because every state will be applying for this, and they're suggesting that the average award could be as much as $15 million per state. We're going for $15 million to support an initiative that will include a partnership with Maine Community College System and the University of Maine to develop with the expert assistance of our specialists at DOE a set of courses and trainings and workshops and content that will allow Maine teachers and school staff and administrators to become innovation engineers. And as part of their work, they will be developing model programs, innovative new designs for offering public education and some systemic change that will that'll help to rising tide to lift all boats. And so the second half of the funding we will be using to provide directly as grants for schools or districts who are willing to pilot and adapt any of the models that are developed through the coursework so that we can spread innovative practices throughout the state in a long-standing way. So that's the project design, and Jess Nixon, I'm sorry I did not introduce, but she is a big part of that work. And just for the sake of time, we're just moving along to the framework. We recently released a framework for what to expect in the fall. And unfortunately, we face a lot of challenges as a state and of course as a nation. We're not alone in the challenges. We are asking schools to be ready for a number of potential eventualities. Those would include an abatement of the virus to the extent that we could safely return to classroom in the fall. They also should be prepared that part of the staff and part of the students within a school would actually be returning in person and the others would be engaging remotely. They also might need to be prepared for the potential that there's a resurgence this summer, and just as we're ready to start school, it's not advisable for schools to start in person, and they would be perhaps 100% remote learning to start in the fall. And the fourth potential scenario that we're looking at is we do go back in person, and then there's a resurgence later in the year, and we are forced to revert to remote learning again in an emergency fashion. In order to be best prepared for that potential, the department has been, as you've heard, we're preparing our online remote learning taught by Maine teachers to Maine students and partnering with Maine teachers for that. We also are providing a lot of technical assistance to schools and educators who are, by the way, exhausted from what they have had to do over this past 3 months. And yet we're trying to offer, opportunities for them to continue their learning in providing high quality remote learning should that be necessary. Finally, what else are we doing? We're doing everything we can to help them to be ready for all of these potential eventualities. Our framework references the federal CDC guidance. So right now, the federal administration has guidance that is published for schools, and it describes a number of safeguards. Those do include such things as spacing, face masks, and other fairly prohibitive recommendations. So it's hard for us to go against the federal CDC as they're the top authority on health and safety. Much of the rest of our document, however, has been developed with input from exciting models from China, from Korea, from Europe, and from across the states, other states that we are partnering with, to take the very best pieces of those models and those plans to infuse into our framework. The framework is a draft. It is our first bullet. You can see there, it's a draft, and we will be seeking input through a survey that you can all participate in very soon. It should be a live link very soon. Again, as the federal CDC health and safety guidelines change, which they, by the way, have changed already multiple times for schools, and we expect that they will change again, as that changes, as the progression or regression of this virus changes, and it has been very changeable, a dynamic situation, and as we receive ongoing feedback from stakeholders, including family members, certainly we're delighted and eager to receive the feedback and input from our legislator partners as well. So we're eager to get everybody's thoughts and input so that we can take all of that into consideration as we continue to revise that framework. It was posted in its draft form specifically because schools were asking, could they have a peek now as they are preparing to end this school year and want people to have something to start wrapping their heads around. That is why we released it in a draft form, and the nature of this situation being so changeable will create a situation where it's going to be a living document. And the final slide there is just, we're looking forward. We have a lot of plans. You've already heard most of those, but I just wanted to point out that I would say I've never been prouder to be part of a team as I am right now of this department. The entire department has stepped up in ways that nobody could have ever imagined. We are receiving a lot of gratitude and love from the field and from other stakeholders. And I think we have knocked it out of the park in terms of what we've been able to provide as a state department to support the educators and the families and the students in schools And I just want to say thanks for the opportunity to share this with you. We're taking your questions now. Oh, no.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Before we go to questions, just want to briefly thank you and your staff for putting together the presentation and making yourselves available this morning. I think it's likely that I know our committee members have a substantial number of questions. So I'm hoping that you're going to have a little flexibility and be able to stay on a little bit longer than originally planned. Great. Okay, so what just again, a reminder for those that are in the same committee room, please make sure that if your committee mate is asking a question, that you mute your computer, not just your Zoom application, but your computer as well. And again, I'm really going to try to make sure that everybody has a chance to ask a question, and that we don't get stuck on one subject, because I think, as we all know, public education is a rather complex, in-depth process, and we have a lot of ground to cover. So with that, I will invite Representative Cornfield to ask a question.
Thank you very much. I actually have two questions. One is, first I want to say I realize how much the department has worked. You've done an amazing job, and I know the teachers have just turned themselves inside out. But we also know that remote learning does not equal face-to-face learning, and particularly for special ed students and the very young. I have a grandson at home who is a special ed student, so I am seeing it firsthand. It does not work remotely. He's just not motivated by a screen. And I would like to hear what you are planning. You know, it's a smaller population. There are less kids in the class. Maybe they could be in the school even if the other kids weren't. So I'd like to hear about that. And the other thing is, I keep hearing hybrid system, but I still do not understand exactly what this means. Does this mean some kids in the classroom and some kids at home? Is that teacher Zooming the classroom to the kids' home? Or is this every other day? Or is this morning and afternoon, half classes? Is this 1 week on and 1 week off? I'd like to hear a little more about what hybrid system means.
Okay, Representative Cornfield, with respect to your first question about what are we going to do better or differently in the future, we, the department, of course, will continue to provide as much support and technical assistance as we can. We have learned a lot of lessons. We've all paid very careful attention as this unfolded. And unfortunately, like many crises, the most vulnerable populations are the ones who are probably harmed the most and who received something that wasn't necessarily accessible to them across the board. And we know that, and it's devastating to know that that has happened. We've been working hard to create minimum standards. There was an uneven experience. Everybody in the state worked as hard as they could. School leaders made very courageous decisions, and educators dropped everything they were doing and turned on a dime to reinvent their practice. And yet, across the state, depending on your zip code, frankly, and in large part due to local control, we had a very uneven experience for both disabled children and for other kids, for very little ones, for whomever it is that doesn't respond as well, as you mentioned, to the remote learning. We recognize that, and we're committed to doing better and to provide better support. We have created minimum standards. Those are in the framework. They are still also in draft form, but we are expecting that all of the districts in Maine would at least, in order to count a remote school day as a school day, they would need to do certain bare minimum things. That'll be part of it. I know Erin might be able to, with respect to your second question, what is a blended, or you said a hybrid model? there are so many possibilities. We will not be determining a model at the state level because local control will ensure that local superintendents, building leaders, and educators, based on their very unique and different capacities, their school building, their geographical layout, the needs of their families and students, they will be creating a variety. So all of those potential examples that you listed could certainly be realities based on the needs and the capacities within each district. So we won't be dictating that. We wouldn't have the right to, nor would we want to. And one size will never fit all in our state. So I can't answer that one, but Erin, do you want to briefly add anything else to what we're doing in terms of special education for readiness for next year?
Yeah, we're continuing to develop training. We also have in our hearts and minds that there are some students who were able to access very little, and we're focusing obviously on how we can support those children coming back, knowing that all children have had a very different experience during this time. Some students in special education have been thriving in this environment, and some have been really lagging. So we are working and developing now ways that we're going to be approaching special education differently in the fall, given that we have some time to provide more technical assistance and learn more as we progress.
Great, thanks so much. Okay, next up, and I apologize, I meant to say that it would be great if everyone could just ask one question at a time, just to make sure that we have an opportunity to get to everybody in the committee. So Senator Pouliot, you're up. Okay, I'll go next to Representative Sampson.
Thank you, Senator Millett. Thanks for pulling all of this stuff together. And I do understand that you all have been doing wonderful, amazing things. But the number one issue that I'm hearing, and I know many of my colleagues are hearing, and is most pressing on people's minds, is parents and teachers concerned about what we are doing going forward. We heard about all kinds of things in the last hour and a half about things that have been done. We have got to start listening to people on the ground as far as moving forward. People are desperate for a plan. They're desperate for strategy. You have parents that have to go back to work. There's teachers that I know, I've talked to many teachers who are wondering whether they're even going to consider coming back. We've got some huge issues to deal with. And what is it that school's going to look like? And I think we need to start getting those discussions happening immediately. And I'd like to hear from you, Commissioner, as to what are your thoughts as far as how do we, what's a timeline? When can we start having really engaged discussions? Not just a survey, that's helpful, yes, because you get a sense, but we need to have that kind of dialogue between the public and between the Department of Education, the legislators. We need to have a very vibrant conversation because parents are very, very on edge about this. And so we're looking at a lot of, depending on where we go, a lot of consequences. So I'd be curious as to your thoughts on that, please.
Sure, of course. So the initial drafting of this framework, again, done in this emergency situation, is a starting place. And we won't be dictating from, as I said, the state, how it's going to look in a certain district or region or county. However, we do intend to engage more with the public and family members. We so far, and really that is partly in honor of local control, that is what the superintendents and building principals and special education staff and educators are doing in each community and each region. We provided the overarching statewide framework. We still want to have engaged conversations at a statewide level, but we also know that our job is to support the schools and the professionals in the schools. We involved all of the experts, and we did also reflect student voice and families and parent advocacy group voice into the development. But what is it going to look like? I know is creating anxiety for people. I know that it is. It's creating anxiety probably for every one of us. It's we are hoping that the virus and that the community health markers will be such that we will need minimal disruption to what people would hope would be the opening of school in the fall. That is a potential eventuality. That could happen, and we're hoping like crazy that it does. We're hoping that Maine continues to be one of the states who are safest right now from the ravages of this virus. And I'm sorry, if you can't hear me, let me know, I'm trying. So I guess the next step will be, we'll take the survey input, and I know that that's not the same as an engaged conversation, and we will be hosting at least webinars and so forth for the public and for families going on into the summer now that the framework is established. Again, being careful not to overreach. We're the State Department, we're not the local school district who really has, they will say, here's what it's really going to look like. We have these buses and this kind of a classroom layout, and this is what the schedule will be to support students. And that's going to very much be district by district, region by region, and in some cases county by county, based on what the community health markers are. It's not going to be painted with one broad brush. If you look at that framework and you think everything has to be done that's on there, you might collapse under the weight of what that might mean. So we're looking at having MEMA and the Department of Education and a couple of doctors from DHHS and also from CDC to help us develop over the next few weeks a matrix of what is the community health marker that we would say creates a low risk, what is a medium risk, and what is a high risk climate in a regional place, in a community. So it might be town by town, and it might be region by region or county by county again. And we'll make it make sense, knowing that Harpswell, for example, is part of Cumberland County, but really? I don't know how that happened. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is we're going to make it make sense for those communities, and we're going to help determine when it's advisable in the external public health realm as compared with what the capacity is within the individual school or district to meet what would be the necessary and advisable health and safety considerations to match that. So when you're in a low risk community, you would need less of the safeguards. And if you are in a high risk community, you might be entirely remote for a period of time until you're into a moderate zone, and you would need a higher level of support with those. So it's going to be very individual, Representative Sampson. Sorry to be nebulous about it.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Representative Farnsworth?
Yes. Good morning. And I guess one of the things that I'm very interested in is probably from the mental health, behavioral health side, especially around the special education, because I know that what I'm hearing from many parents is trying to deal with the behavioral issues that are going on as a result of the children being at home all the time. And so I guess I would point the question in two directions. One is, do we have the resources to begin to provide the behavioral analysis and program planning for families? And number two, do we have appropriate referrals for mental health services? Because many of these families are on such a very, very tenuous status because of the tension that has resulted.
Yeah, I would invite, I'll start off, but I would invite Aaron Fraser and or Bear Shea to pipe in with your thoughts or ideas. But I just want to validate your concern regarding the extreme weight this has placed on families who counted on school for so many reasons, certainly for the growth, academic, and so forth, but even just for the respite. Families of children who have behavioral, social, emotional, or mental health conditions are under tremendous pressure and duress 24 hours a day. And I know how painful that is. And I know how difficult it's been for them to withstand that. And therefore, we are going to do everything in our power to make sure that we're able to support. And I think Erin may have some things to share, and Bear might also.
Yeah, many of you might not know that I have behavioral health day treatment in my background. That's where I got my start in education. And so it's certainly near and dear to me. And I also know the impact of the lapse of services for these individuals are clearly devastating. So we've been working and partnering with DHHS and trying to figure out what resources that we could provide families. Certainly, we also partner with Maine Parent Federation, and we do a lot of parent work ourselves. We work a lot with parents to understand and direct them to the correct services. It was tricky in the beginning, given the lack of physical, the social distancing. And then about halfway into it, we started understanding that NAMI was providing some respite services. So we started working with Maine Parent Federation, and we started providing that experience. And then all along, the Special Services Department is working with Bear Shea and Rich's team around how we can communicate to folks how to look for signs of stress during any remote experience, or how we can use staff in a different way to provide help and support for children. So this has been a huge focus of us through both of our teams. We've been teaming together to try to make sure people feel supported and getting them the support they need when they need it. So we continue to do that and try to expand Maine behavioral health services moving forward.
The expansion to include people from DHHS and the other provider community, I think, is really critical in terms of providing that access.
Thank you, Representative Farnsworth. I can add on to that because I think that relationship has always been key, the relationship between child protection and school. And we know that the number of abuse reportings is significantly down, and that isn't because it's not happening, but it's because schools aren't there to be that support. And so creating that link and making sure that that's something that we're following up on and reaching out to families and students and making sure those supports are there. And just also addressing that a lot of these services were lacking before this. And so that's something we were already working on in rebuilding those services. I think one of the, maybe a small silver lining out of this is looking at how telehealth, which was really an underutilized platform before, is now something that we're able to put across the state. And so areas that and districts that didn't have school clinicians or social workers or school counselors available, we can now spread that using a telehealth platform. And we're sort of building those guidelines as we're going on, and it's been a useful space. So. But the mental health piece, and the other significant is that we had all these vulnerable populations before and students that were seeking our services before. And because of how this crisis has affected all of our mental health, we have a whole host of new students that maybe never would have needed these services at all. And so finding ways to make sure that we are addressing those needs and that schools are reaching out and that those students and families have ways to reach out to schools. I think it also just shows how important schools are in that community fabric for addressing these issues. And so I think that mental health piece through the DOE will continue to be a significant one, as well as through the Maine School Safety Center.
Okay, Representative Dodge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question goes further than that. Can Mr. Shapiro and Mr. Shea talk about the specific formula of information going upward or outward from teachers and their reporting? Do they know now the new formula and steps to take to report their concerns about student safety? And then the return of information and solutions to teachers. What is that specific channel, please?
I think, John, I can start with the beginning of that. I think from the classroom model, we've provided a lot of content, recorded sessions to educators on how are we identifying behavior change and response within our virtual classrooms, as well as students that haven't been able to access some of those virtual classrooms. What are the processes we're making sure that we're following up and communicating with those students and families? And that we're mandated reporters, no matter what situation we're in. And so making sure that those mandated reported guidelines are being followed through, and working, really pairing with DHHS on how we are sharing out that new information, and also making sure that things are being followed through. So Jonathan, I think you could take maybe the next step up, bigger picture.
Yes, thank you. Well, we did one of our specific trainings that we did to stakeholders in the field was to address this very issue about just because the students were now in a remote environment, that there was still abuse going on, and there still needed to be a mechanism, and that mandated reporters were still responsible in this remote setting. So we did have that, and we did address, what the state law is on that matter. We did address the difference between an emergency versus a suspected issue for police involvement for an emergency. And if it was a suspected issue, then the pathway obviously would be, and there is, internal for the schools, it goes up to the I believe to the head administrator, and then within a certain amount of time it goes up to DHHS. And then there's also a mechanism there that the district attorney's office would be notified as well of any abuse. So we covered all that. It is recorded. It is on, and I admitted in my initial statement that one of the other things that we accomplished was we have put together the basics of a Maine School Safety Center webpage, and all of our sessions have been recorded on there so people can go back and look at them. And I am planning, as we move into the fall, to again put up a roster, so to speak, out on some of these issues as a refresher, reminding people that they're available to look at. So A to Z, as far as mandatory reporting, what to look for, how to report, and what the obligations of the law, that was all covered, and we are planning again to cover it again as needed, to make sure that stays forefront. If we stay in this, remote setting, but it's also something I think that regularly should be brought up, because again, to reiterate, schools really, I believe it's 30 or 40% of all reports of suspected abuse come through the schools. So it's a very important mechanism to keep in place, regardless if it's traditional school setting or it's a remote setting, or again, a hybrid of making sure that those people are aware of this concern and know how to report it.
Okay, thank you. Representative Drinkwater.
Thank you, Senator Millett. I'd like to thank the department on all the hard work they've done. I mean, there's so many different scenarios we're looking at. It's hard to prepare for any one. I would like to hear the department touch on sports. As my schools are looking at it right now, it looks like sports are all canceled for the fall. I'd also like to hear the department talk about town meeting. I've got 4 town meetings coming up, and people are going to ask me, what about funding? I've heard the commissioner talk about, this could cost upwards of hundreds of millions of dollars statewide. I'm concerned about the cost of each school. And lastly, I would like to encourage the commissioner, because I met with some bus companies yesterday, to have a meeting, a Zoom meeting preferably, with the stakeholders when it comes to busing. Sear Bus Line in my town and area is very concerned with they're calling them mandates on busing and what that's going to add to the cost of education. So if the commissioner would just touch on those 3 things, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
So just a reminder, I did ask folks to try to focus on one question, so we had an opportunity to get to everybody. But Commissioner, if you think you can get through all those 3 in fairly quick fashion, that would be fine.
I will try my best. With respect to sports, the Maine Principals Association regulates the Interscholastic League of Sports, and there will be decisions made district by district regarding what modifications or what levels of participation they're going to be offering and what safeguards. You're going to make sure that people are obviously following laws and executive orders to be safe. And I know that there are independent decisions made by different districts around the athletics. We don't regulate that as a department. The second thing, town meetings, people are going to be asking about the budget. And I wish I had a crystal ball. I guess we can all say that our nation, our state, and our local communities have all been experiencing something we never could have imagined. We're facing a potential financial situation that, you know, has been, that we don't know what the impact is going to be. And that's, I wish I could tell you, I know exactly what it'll be, and it'll be this. I can tell you that we worked very hard at the department and across with the governor's office and with our partners in the Department of Administrative and Financial Services to create a subsidy printout through the EDU 279 formula that helped every district and that made very legitimate gains toward a UAL irrespective 55% funding, and that lowered the mill rate significantly. People were really happy. It took so much work to create very carefully this balance, and we were proud of that package, and we were delighted when it received unanimous approval. And we hope to stand firm in and protect that above pretty much everything else. Should there be a need to protect one thing over another, and we just don't know what that's going to be yet. And that's the unfortunate news for folks who are trying to settle budgets. And if you're talking about the additional cost of, for example, PPE for educators or for students, those types of expenses, the department has been working again with DAFs, who are in charge of procurement for statewide needs like PPE and those types of supplies. We put in an order on behalf of all of the Maine municipalities so that we would be able to provide that for them. We certainly are going to be able to procure it, make it available, and it's difficult to do that because there's a global shortage of many of those items, and that's why we had orders in early to make sure that we know we could put our hands on necessary materials. We're also hoping that we would be able to fund that from the state so that individual school districts won't be saddled with unplanned for, impossible to have ever predicted costs that would be related to reopening in the fall. Was there another one? There was a what was your, oh, transportation. Yes, we will continue. We'll meet with, we have been getting ongoing feedback from the administrators of school transportation systems. And we know that there currently are some pretty prohibitive recommendations at the federal CDC level. We are looking at how those may change. We hear that they may be changing. We're looking at how responsive we can be with respect to regional and local presence of community health risk or lack thereof. So we're certainly interested in meeting further with the bus drivers and their administrators, and we know that they're facing a unique and daunting challenge. Thank you for your 3 questions.
Okay, next up is Representative McCray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First off, I want to say, I think the department has done a great job in answering as best they can all kinds of issues. It's very hard to come up with answers when you don't have the evidence because it hasn't presented itself yet. When we get to late August, we'll probably know an awful lot more about where we're going to go. And that's the basis of my question. Our reopening committee, which is pretty broad up in my district, in my town at least, it has a simple question. Is some thought being given, or can you give us any guidance as to whether it will be a regionally decided thing based on the experience, based on infection rates, based on population densities and stuff like that? Or will it perhaps most likely be a statewide approach to opening? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. And the answer is yes, we will be doing this as it makes most sense for schools. So it could be local. One school district could be ready and could be, within the community health risk level, could have the capacity to keep people safe. So it could be local, it could be regional, And it could be county by county as the school districts wish. We are there to serve them. They will ask us, you know, do we want to try this as an individual district or as a region? We're going to be completely flexible about providing guidance and letting them know, according to the scientists and medical folks, whether it's advisable at this point, given your capacity and challenges. So yeah, it'll be very individualized to support the communities and their needs.
Thank you.
Representative Brennan?
Yes, thank you. Commissioner, thank you very much for the presentation and for all the information. I have one very specific question about homeless students. And it's estimated that there are between 2,000 and 2,500 homeless students and families in the state of Maine. And obviously, during this time, it's even more difficult to find housing, internet access, stable places for learning and everything else. I know the department just issued 24-25 McKinney mini grants and to address homeless issues. I'm assuming that's existing money from the federal government. So my question is, how, over the last 3 or 4 months, have there been any specific strategies or interventions to reach out to homeless families and homeless students in order to do the best we can to keep them connected?
Yeah, hi, thanks for that question. And yes, that mini grant program was using existing federal resources for homeless students. It was a newly designed grant. Our team came up with this idea in response to the emergency situation, recognizing how these homeless children and families were going to bear a disproportionate harm under these circumstances. So we developed a new program that would allow us to create some fairly low barrier in terms of getting money from us to the people in need, the schools and students. So we used specifically targeted money that is specifically for providing such services to the homeless children. And we made it readily accessible. And we did award, I believe, 24, I think, of those mini grants. In terms of how we're supporting these schools and the practitioners, every district, as you probably know, has a McKinney-Vento liaison. And that person in each district has been in charge of keeping track of where the kids are and the families and maintaining data and staying in contact to be sure that they are outfitted with the necessary life-giving resources. I know that our team, I know Bear and Rich's entire Office of School and Student Supports has provided specific training and guidance for those McKinney-Vento liaisons. The department, personally, we have not specifically reached out to individual students, as it would not be that wouldn't be our purview, but we are heavily supporting the people who are reaching out to the students.
Thank you.
Representative Rudnicki?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really concerned about school districts that rely heavily on state funding. And my question is this: if a school district decides to open normally without any of basically the framework that you're putting forth, and they open normally, are they going to be punished financially? Because, you know, a lot of this framework is very expensive. And I don't foresee a lot of school districts being able to pay that, to pay a lot of this stuff that's coming down the line. So, you know, is there going to be any punishment? Are you going to withhold any fundings to school districts that don't follow your framework?
Thank you for that question. And the answer to that would be no. We will not in any way financially or otherwise punish, nor do we have a vehicle by which we could if we were so inclined, which, by the way, we're not. We're not about punishing school districts. And in fact, we hope to support school districts with the additional unexpected costs of implementing much of the at least for the PPE. And we are not sure how much further we're going to be able to go, but we do know that there are some things that if everything on that list were to be implemented, it would be extremely expensive. You're right. And I encourage communities to recognize how much having schools be safe, healthy, and operational in your communities contributes to the economic health therein. And so I'm hoping that all together with state and local resources, we're going to realize that this is a lift we need to make together as an investment in our ongoing economic health and recovery.
Okay, Representative Ingerson.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? First of all, I want to thank everybody for being here today and to thank the DOE for your really hard work through this really tough time. I know people in my district have really appreciated it. I have a question. In your rough draft of your framework in part 3, you talked about COVID impact recovery services. You know, we're so busy trying to just keep up and catch up, and it was interesting to look at this in terms of a kind of loss that may have happened. And could you talk a little bit about that, particularly for students with disabilities and IEPs? Maybe Aaron could talk a little bit about that, how you see that happening going forward.
Erin, would you like to respond in terms
Yes,
of?
I will. So there's a lot to think about in regard to the impact of this time period of remote instruction. So what we've been trying to do is kind of clarify terms for people so that they could really start thinking about special education students and general education students and the differences there. So COVID impact recovery services is a broad term that kind of describes the impact of this remote experience on all learners. And so it's going to be important moving forward that we evaluate and assess what all learners, the experience that all learners had, and then look to our special populations further to kind of clarify what needs they have in comparison to the group. Because we know that all kids likely have lost some skills or regressed in some skills during this time. And we know that some special education students have been really actively thriving in this environment and some haven't. So what our plan is to really closely look at the goals of these IEPs as we're coming back into the fall to kind of look at progress and present, we call it present level of performance, you know, how a student is doing functionally and how they're doing educationally. And because we need that comparison of how all kids are doing, we want to just clarify that COVID impacts all students who are school aged. So that is our plan. Henry, did you have any further clarifying questions around that?
No, other than it seems like a really difficult thing to do. And I appreciate that you're thinking about it and just kind of wondering how you see it going forward. And are there models there that seem to be looking successful? I know it's early, but.
Well, so nationally, we're talking about MTSS models. MTSS stands for multi-tiered systems of support. Mm-hmm. And we're looking at that comprehensively beyond general education students. But because all students will need potentially different types of interventions, we would be looking at a whole school approach and recommending a whole school approach to kind of looking at making the gains. Our suggestion is kind of looking at models of where we wanted kids to be at the end of the year, figure out where they are now, and then plan for how we can compensate for potentially some learning loss that occurred during this time. And that's nationally what kind of is being spoken about. And then the great thing about special education students is that all of the work that we do with them is individualized to the child. So we would be looking at, the teams would be looking at what has individually occurred for the child. And I'm sorry, you can hear my dog in the background. What's happening individually for the child to assess what extra support we may need to provide in order to compensate for that regression or loss of skill. So that's kind of where we're headed with that. We also have to make sure that we're always keeping least restrictive environment in mind. So we don't want to make kids, assume that every child in special education has to be pulled out for the entire day to make up for this time period. So we want to really carefully make those decisions individually to make sure that we can catch people up, all children, and then potentially give more and specific skill, instruction to specific kids. So that's kind of where we're headed with our thinking. And nationally, we're obviously paying attention to how everyone is speaking and approaching this so that we can take the best of what everyone is thinking right now and has to offer so that we can do what's best for our students in Maine with disabilities.
Thank you.
Great. So Holly Couturier from MPA, Maine Principals Association, has a little information to share that she included in chat, but I think it would be good for her to just briefly respond to the earlier question around athletics so that folks that are streaming can hear the answer.
Sure. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Yeah, just like I had said, the MPA has been closely monitoring everything since the middle of March, obviously, when all of this took place. And the Sports Medicine Committee has been meeting on a regular basis and came up with some draft guidelines regarding specifically summer, the hands-off period, as well as fall sports, and looking forward into next year. And those draft guidelines were then proposed to the Interscholastic Management Committee, who then offered some potential thoughts in regards to the guidelines. And then that the sports committee meeting was going to be reconvening, I think it was yesterday afternoon. And then they were going to be revising those guidelines. However, that all being said, I know that Mike Burnham, the executive director of the Interscholastic, as well as Mike Bisson, the assistant executive director, have been taking calls and emails on a regular basis from schools throughout the state and offering specific advice and guidelines to those individual schools and districts. That also being said, Mike Burnham, we're fortunate actually that Mike is on the executive board for NFHS, which is the National Federation that creates guidelines for sports throughout the United States. So he has access to a lot of expertise beyond the state level when helping to create these guidelines. So what my advice to all of you is, if any of your constituents get in touch with you in regards to any athletics, encourage them to reach out to either Mike Burnham or Mike Bisson at the office, and know that the guidelines are going to be released to the schools as soon as possible. They want to make sure that they're able to give the most up-to-date information. But just know also that they are going to be following 100% the guidelines set by the department, by the governor's office, and the CDC.
Thank you very much. Okay, so my question, Commissioner, relates to the CARES Act funding and whether or not that can be accessed to help a number of areas of concern. One being the potential that we're going to lose about 100 meal sites for summer nutrition. I understand that they just don't have the funding to help support those, and whether or not the CARES Act funding could be put to use there. And also with the pre-K providers and special purpose schools as well. I've heard now for several months that they are really struggling as a result of the pandemic, and wondering what plans are being put in place to assist them with CARES Act funding. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Millett. Yes, we certainly supplementing the cost of the food services is an allowable cost under the CARES Act funding that the ESSERF funding that has been provided to the districts. And I think a lot of people are intending to use the funding for that purpose. Walter, is there anything that you can share about our losing 100 or so meal sites? Is that really happening? I hadn't heard it.
So before the new waiver came out, we would have lost 60% of our sites, which means about 62% of our kids. When the waiver that came out recently, they were able, any site that already exists is able to continue. So with all those sites are going to stay on board. There are some sites that have decided on their own that they want to seek a different method or stop or where it might be. But all those sites we were going to lose. I think we got 45% that already said they're staying on with us, but there was that potential to lose 60%. And that USDA waiver took care of that. And it's still on the summer program, which is the higher reimbursement as well.
So I'm sorry, Mr. Beasley, are you saying that right now only 45% of the current nutrition programs are planning to continue into the summer?
No, I'm sorry. Of the 60% we were going to lose, 45% of the 60% is saying they're going to stay on now. So but potentially we'll lose today, maybe only 15% compared to the 60. We haven't got all the districts or sponsors have their paperwork in yet for the summer. But we definitely turned that around when we got that waiver.
If I may, Commissioner, I'd also like to add a few more details. So the ESER application, they're determined at the local level. And so many districts right now are meeting to discuss priorities. And in the 25 I mentioned earlier that have been approved and the funding has been released, several of them have included child nutrition as a need. And so some of those items are, the cost for the salaries of those that are doing the work of serving our students, but also some of the additional needs that they have in terms of supplies. And so many of our districts are still having their stakeholder discussions and determining what priorities will be met by the $43.7 million that Maine has in ESER funds, but that is an allowable expense under ESER.
And the other question was with respect to pre-K special purpose schools. Is that right, Senator Millett?
Pre-K and special purpose, yes.
Oh, two separate things. Okay, right.
But that was in terms of accessing the CARES Act money to support them. It was kind of just trying to get a sense of how accessible those funds are for these various issues.
Right. And so districts have some considerable flexibility with the funding. IDEA, for example, is one of the federal programs under which they can apply those funds. So yes, that would be an allowable expense for the CARES Act funding.
Okay, I'm not going to take up a lot more time, but I don't think that quite gets to the question, so I'm going to follow up separately. All right, we're going to swing back around to the beginning. Senator Pouliot.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Commissioner Macon, for your update, and to all of those who are on this call working at the Department of Ed. We really appreciate the work that you're doing day in and day out to help make public education in Maine the best it can be. So thank you very much. My question really is to Commissioner Macon, and it has to do with some of the things that I've heard today. I'm a little bit concerned about the lack of a plan for what virtual education might look like in the event that we're not allowed to have schools go back this fall. I'm sure you're considering it, but there was nothing really clearly articulated as to what would happen. It seems to me the plan is that we hope schools will go back to normal. Certainly, I hope that's the case as well. But I believe it's imperative that we have a clear, concise plan moving forward with regard to remote learning for Maine students. I've heard a lot of discussion about the development of a new virtual learning platform from scratch, but I'm wondering what has been done to work with providers such as Pearson or others that are already providing public education to Maine students through the virtual public charter schools, and have for a long time put really good foundational aspects in place to provide some of this kind of education to students. So I guess, my question really, to clearly articulate it, is have the virtual public charters been involved in this discussion about providing virtual education for Maine students in the event that we are not able to return to a traditional classroom environment?
So to your last point, and then I'll try to work backward from there. Thank you for the questions and the insights. So our department staff has consulted directly with the leaders of the virtual schools to find out how they do a number of things, what policies they have, how do they figure out attendance, how well is, and the platform works for some students and not for others. And certainly we want to make sure that there's a wide array of opportunities for students to experience their education. So we have consulted with them. We have taken some of their ideas around various policies, practices, even as we discussed such mundane things as how long would a school day be virtually? How long can you expect a child to be, of a certain age to be glued to an online system, for example? We've also looked at a number of learning management systems. We are familiar with Pearson's. There's another one that's K-12, I think, that's used in our state by the other virtual school. And right now, what we've found is that Maine students in general are responding far better and are engaged more with activities that are put out there on platforms that teachers are engaged in. So for example, Google Classroom is a way for a live human teacher to be providing instruction and lessons and units of study and challenges, and they are able to differentiate and recognize when a student might be struggling or when somebody's needing more challenge and needs to race ahead. Those little components they're not little, they're actually huge, but they're the minute little interactions that happen multiple times in that teacher-student relationship. So we also are looking at an online learning management system called Brightspace. And the reason we are looking at that is because the community college system in Maine and the University of Maine system have both just signed on for, they want to all use this, and they have approached us and asked if we would be interested as well. And we said, that's a very interesting thought, and that's more similar. It's not so much a canned curriculum. No, I don't mean canned in a bad, it's just not a pre-prepared curriculum, but it's an online learning management system that would have more bells and whistles and features than, for example, what is right now free and available as Google Classroom, or I'm trying to think of the name of another one of the, at any rate. So we're interested, we're examining those options. We think that there'd be a lot of great stuff that could happen if we were aligned in such a way, because students in secondary education could seamlessly be engaging both in their regular education and in a higher education track or offering, or, so there are many, so the answer is yes, we're exploring it. No, we haven't settled on any type of, what we're necessarily going to do, but why are we doing that homegrown version? The main reason is because we're creating it so that our teachers who have different levels right now of expertise and experience with providing online learning could actually co-teach with a colleague, a Maine educator who is certified and teaches content to students every day in Maine, who's familiar with the scope and sequence of our Maine learning results curriculum standards. And it could really be a scaffolding situation to support educators and to make sure we never again are faced with, in a situation where somebody really does not know what to do and they are in charge of a classroom that has to be managed remotely. Here is going to be a plan C that is not just we could put a prefab curriculum out there, and there are many of them, and yet this is going to be an interdisciplinary. We're really moving away from, as much as possible, the siloing of content, because we know that our students are not going to go from high school or into college or into the workplace and like walk down one hallway. None of us walk down a hallway and do some math and then turn a corner and engage in some literacy-based thing. We really want to be more innovative and more integrated in the way we offer content for students. It's been shown to certainly improve student learning and the transferability of the skills that they gain. So we're hoping to have something. The answer is we couldn't find anything that was imaginative enough or as integrated or forward thinking as what we believe that we, with the assistance and partnership of Maine educators, will be able to provide for our kids. So we want that Plan C to be top notch and not a, oh, you know, you're relegated to this because it's all we have. We want it to just be something spectacular that will up everybody's game. And that's why we chose to do that.
That sounds fantastic. I really like the sound of that. What date should the public be expecting that plan will be available for implementation?
So as Beth mentioned earlier, our goal, and we believe it's a reachable goal, is that by September 6th coming, that we will have an entire first quarter's worth of interdisciplinary project-based learning based on Maine learning results in every content area and in every grade level, I think K through 12. And I don't know if we've hit pre-K yet, but I mean, this is a very ambitious goal. And a nod to the educators in our state who are excited and inspired by this idea. We put out one call to, you know, are you interested in being part of this? And 400 educators within a week said, sign me up. Like, they are really coming to the fore to be part of something this innovative. I've shared it with other chiefs of education in other states across the country, and they love the idea. And I think others are possibly going to, you know, follow along at some point, because going forward, I don't know if it's reasonable to think that we would ever always, anybody in the country would ever revert to no form of remote or online option available for students. And I think this is just going to up everybody's game. And I think it's going to highlight the deep professionalism and expertise of our phenomenal educators in the process. So we're really excited about it. Look for it September 6th.
Thank you, Commissioner. We're going to have to move on, Senator. Representative Fecteau has yet to ask his first question. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. I want to give a special shout out to Ms. Rogers, the world language specialist at the department. She went above and beyond to make sure my seniors had their seals of biliteracy before graduation, and I deeply appreciate that. Moving on, I did find it a little frustrating today that the department only spent 5 minutes digging into the 3,000-word, 5-pronged return to the classroom instruction framework, because that's overwhelmingly where my constituents' concerns lie. So to preface my question, I hear you mention local control, but in a June 11th Portland Press Herald article, it said the state and not local school boards would decide when they can return to school. So therefore, the department is looking into the possibility of suspending portions of local control. And in the DOE framework, particularly Part 3, Section A, Item 2, tells them to draft curriculum plans for transitioning between in-person, hybrid, and remote learning at any time. So like I say, the framework is a recommendation. You say you may suspend their own local control, leaving them no option. So by my calculations, in order to live up to Part 3, Section A, Item 2, 1 week of work at $25 an hour for 10,000 teachers comes to $10 million. So my question is, since the DOE may be suspending local control in that aspect and school budgets are already locked in, will the department be funding that portion of the framework, or are teachers supposed to do that work for free?
Well, Representative Fecteau, within that that mathematical question, there is one variable in that entire line of logic that started you off on the wrong track, and that is, and we're going to remind ourselves, don't believe everything you read in the paper, because the Portland Press Herald actually did not call me or talk to me. I know I'm quoted in the article, and yet I spoke to nobody there. And no, we don't intend to suspend, nor we have no intention of suspending local control. What we have offered is knowing that our superintendents, let's look at what they have to do in terms of decision-making. They have to decide if it's going to snow or not snow on any given day. And if they are wrong about it, they take more grief than any weatherman who's paid professionally to do that work. Can we just say that? And meanwhile, they're also not doctors. They're not epidemiologists. And we know that they would benefit from the support and partnership in a collaboration with the State Department of Education and MEMA and DHHS and CDC to help them to understand when it's advisable, given their capacity for implementing safeguards as it relates to the external risk factors. And so we're just there on an advisory as needed basis to tell them, here, we'll let you know when we believe it's advisable, safe and healthy, and it's you're in your best place to return to in-person instruction. We have absolutely no intention or right to suspend local control. Thank you so much for letting me clear that up, because it killed me when I read it in the paper.
So thank you. And with that, will there be funding to local schools for curriculum development?
I do think that that's another one of the potential uses of the ESSER funds. And we also are going to support as much as possible. If people are interested in the support from the State Department content area specialists, we're definitely there to help and support that work. In terms of cash dollars, I mean, we will have to see. We are going to work very hard to maintain and to increase the level of support we're able to offer to local schools. I think it is a key priority, given everything we have to look at as a state. I think education is the one ticket to restoring our economy, restoring a thriving and a better democracy in the future. So yeah, we're going to do our best to invest in it.
Okay, Representative Sampson, we are going through our second round. Do you have another question?
Oh, I didn't know we were going to get a second round. That's exciting.
It is, isn't it?
So my question, and maybe this is for Jonathan, I have a note here. I mean, we've spent a lot of time in this past session discussing the shift in our education and our curriculum, dealing with social emotional learning. And looking forward with what children are going to be dealing with school, I would like to hear, I know the plan is still a draft, but I think the issue here is that we're dealing with many, many children, I mean, all the children who have been put in a very, very scary place. And school needs to be a safe place and a place where kids aren't, locked in fear. And how do we focus going forward? And like I said, I've already said, I understand these are drafts, and maybe Commissioner, you can weigh in on this. But our children are going to be coming to school with a heavy burden, and it's impacting their mental health. That'll impact their behavioral health. It's going to impact the way they interact with each other. We're talking about increased suicides taking place. I just got some data yesterday from the chief coroner's office. It's concerning to me. And what would be the top, say your top priority of focusing in a practical, doable manner to address children who are going to be coming to school filled with fear and anxiety?
Hi, sorry about that. I had a hard time unmuting. I'll start, and then I invite Bear Shea and certainly Jonathan Shapiro to chime in. But in advance of this emergency, we did have ongoing statewide whole school trauma informed is what we're really talking about here. So one of our number one priorities is going to be assisting schools to become, excuse me, trauma informed and trauma sensitive environments for everybody. And we were going to do that before we realized that everybody will truly have suffered some sort of loss or grief or trauma. And now that that is likely going to be the case, it'll be more important than ever. So we're providing very robust and free and ongoing trainings and consultation around that. So that would be my first priority. We also have priorities of, we do want to eventually reflect in our funding formula, and it's certainly going to be down the road, but the necessity of mental health staff members, more social workers in schools. And I think that that's going to be something to look forward to in the future. But right now, if we can get everybody trained and supported to provide a trauma-informed environment, we know that the brain research will show that they would then be able to learn, because if they are feeling traumatized, their limbic system is overriding their prefrontal cortex, and they're not going to be able to access learning. Bear and Jonathan, feel free to chime in.
Thank you, Representative Sampson. This is such an important topic, and certainly one that we've been working on for a long time. I believe the last time I reported to you, we were talking about how to take our trauma-informed curriculum and put it into a virtual platform to make it more accessible. And unfortunately, we've had to do that. And so I think that is, again, a small silver lining in that all of our trainings and our focuses and approach are being made available online, both in individual content sessions that are direct, but also in individual calls from districts on how we're providing some of these services in, sort of our unique school settings across the state. And I think that's one of the pieces, is that there isn't one big enveloping answer. It really has been us at the DOE trying to take this case by case and taking best practices and putting them into places in schools that make the most sense for those schools. We know that social emotional learning is a very important part of this, and it's something that our state has been doing really well in some districts for decades. And that's really the benefit of developing this SEL program, is that it will be something that can be easily accessed, that can be free for our districts, so that they can add it into their entire culture. It isn't just about making this a classroom-based curriculum. It really is about looking at how we're interacting with schools, with students in schools, so that we're providing that sense of safety. And as the commissioner said, when we have that safety, and really that's what our relationship with our students is all about as educators, then it allows students to regulate, it allows their brains to regulate and engage. And a lot of this work is going to be done. It's something we've been talking about with school counselors and clinical-based social workers and other clinical supports in schools. It's really going to be done around how are we not only addressing all of the anxiety and all of the emotional pieces that may be barriers coming back, but it will also be about addressing the healing from the pieces that have come from COVID-19 this spring. And I think also recognizing that this isn't just a mental health issue for our students and that they need supports, but that our educators are really bearing the brunt of this as well. And so that's one of the pieces the DOE we're really trying to provide, is not only all of these best practices for our students, but making sure that our educators have the supports they need and the structures and systems that they're getting support so that they're at their best in providing this for our students. It's been an ongoing process, and something that we are working with not only districts and at a state level, but nationally and with international models as well. Unfortunately, we have good research from crisis scenarios from other places and on how to use best practices to really look at how crises affect all of us in our brains. So this is something, unfortunately, we have a lot of information on and are looking at getting that to the field in the most effective way.
Great, thank you. So I'm just going to remind folks again that the Zoom group chat is not available to the public, and so we shouldn't be having any sort of substantive discussions on Zoom. I'll just share that the commissioner did confirm that by September 6th, they are working to having at least Q1 of I'm hoping that's pre-K-12 courses study, including all content areas. So that is the plan. And then the rest of the year will be built out following that. Okay, next up is Representative Farnsworth.
Thank you once again. And I want to thank you for the tremendous amount of background information you've been able to provide us. And also the recognizing the incredible amount of work that you folks have done, trying to reorganize the system in order to meet the COVID-19 crisis. My question is around pre-K. We've been trying to expand the pre-K program, and I know that there was additional money in for this next budget year. The question I have is, has the crisis resulted in some districts who were planning on doing that, stepping back and saying, maybe that's not where we can go right now?
Hi, thank you for the question. We do have some anecdotal information, hearing that some parents, family members who had been planning to send their child to pre-K, and similarly, some parents who were planning to send their child to kindergarten for the first time, have been talking about the potential of not sending them this year. And so it's anecdotal. We don't have measures on that. We're going to look into it because it's compelling. Which one is the answer? So I do know that that could create both class size issues in both years, and certainly that would impact subsidy following in both years. So if that were to be a trend that actually plays itself out, I have a response that one of our staff members prepared, and it says that as the committee knows, our newly expanded pre-K programs begin to receive subsidy for the new fiscal year based on estimated enrollment counts for the population. Yes, you know that. And it looks like in May, so as of May, the school finances team received requests from 5 school units to remove pre-K estimates, totaling 126 students were removed from their estimated counts going in. So we do have this data. And that is approximately $387,000 in state subsidy would be impacted by that. The reduction leaves an estimated 236 new pre-K students for the school year, and the number will be verified as usual on the October 1 counts.
Right. Thank you. Is there any way that we could, if it's based upon financial concerns, talk to the schools and encourage them to move forward, because it really is such a critical program?
Right. I think I haven't heard that any school is not moving forward with their actual plan. It's more about they've adjusted their estimates down based on what they're hearing in their communities. But we do have an amazing pre-K early childhood team at the department, and I know that they're working hard with all of the local school districts. And we're also partnering with, as you probably know, OCFS and others at DHHS through the Children's Cabinet to certainly encourage early childhood education and supports across that dynamic. So the good news is I think that the children who need it the most will perhaps find slots in these programs if there are families who have the capacity to keep them home and care for them. I don't know how this will play out, but we definitely want them to come in. And we haven't heard that any actual programs are closing. It's just the numbers have gone down in their estimates.
Thank you. Representative Dodge?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe my question is to Paige and to Beth about the 79 schools that you have not heard from. Can you tell us a bit about where they are in connectedness on the internet and engagement of students in their learning, please? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I don't have that information right in front of me, but those are answers I can get to you and follow up on where in the state those schools are. We're reaching out to them directly right now, so we can find out more information then. I'd be glad to follow up.
Can you clarify, please? You have not heard from 79 schools about what?
So the survey that we've issued 4 times to gather information about what the connectivity needs are in each district, there are 79 schools in the state that we have not yet heard from. So we issued the survey 4 times in an effort to offer many opportunities given all that administrators were up against this past spring. So with those 79 remaining and our goal of reaching 100%, we're just making specific outreach to the remaining schools to meet their needs.
Great.
And we do know there are some schools who have all students in those districts are able to access the internet. So there are districts who maybe opted not to answer the survey because they didn't have disconnected students. So we'll find out more.
That'd be great. Thank you. Representative Drinkwater, you are up next if you are on.
Thank you, Senator. I am here.
And remember, 1 question, please.
Yes, ma'am. It's a short one. Listen, Commissioner, on your framework for returning classroom school updated on the 10th of June, Part 1, you talk about determining when it's safe to begin in-person instruction. How early of a heads up are you going to give the SAUs for you are allowed? I'm hearing a lot of angst in the superintendents about the unknown. Thank you.
So I'm glad that you will be able to put their fears to rest, because they are not going to be disallowed or not permitted by us to make decisions as they wish. However, at their request, and once we don't have our process developed, nor do we have the metrics that we'll be using within our process developed just yet. We expect that should be ready by mid-July. And at the request of a district or a group of school districts, we will partner with them and collaboratively make that determination. So that'll be on their timeline as needed and as requested. We're not going to impose it, and we're not going to disallow. Now, that said, there do exist right now executive orders that would disallow large groups over a certain size and have other certain requirements. But when those are no longer, or if those are able to be met, and if those are no longer in play in the fall, they technically don't need our permission. So they can, if they choose to plan on ahead, they certainly are encouraged to do so. And if they would like us to help determine that it's advisable, we are delighted to provide that support as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. Representative McRae.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This is going to be a tough question, and if we need to dodge it, we certainly can. So when we finally do get back to convening people in person, being in classrooms, whenever that might be, and whatever circumstances that is, I suspect DOE, regional school districts, schools in particular, may well have rules that say you can't attend without face coverings. What I'm curious about is what's going to happen when students show up and say, I'm not doing that. Or they wear their face mask into school, and when they get to English class, you can't make me put it on. What teeth will there be in that rule? What support will we have on that? I know that's a tough question, but it had to be asked. Thank you.
Well, I hope you don't see this as a dodge, but what I will say is that we're encouraging schools to use restorative justice disciplinary practices, which would include practicing good behaviors, rewarding good behaviors, and then providing educational and restorative responses if students don't follow rules in a school. And that's everything from, think of cell phone use. It's just, I mean, there are many concerning relentless behavioral conditions that I think each individual school and group of staff members and administrators are going to need to find what that plan is, and hopefully involving families and getting community input on the front end of all of this. What we've seen in just around, I mean, you see teenagers walking around town with these on and with, kids. I think, will it be a challenge? Yes, there are going to be so many really difficult challenges for our educators and school leaders to face. We're going to support them with strategies for maintaining orderly and safe school environments, but we can't go quite that far in terms of overreach to tell them how they will manage student behaviors. And if it's considered, to be unsafe, they're going to have to find some protocols to support.
Thank you both. And my apologies to my good co-chair. I totally skipped over Representative Cornfield. So she's up next.
Commissioner, I heard a suggestion about looking for other spaces in a town that single classes could meet in to lessen the numbers in a building. Is that possible, or are there too many safety concerns for a single classroom to be outside a school building?
It's actually done quite frequently. Of course, there are safety concerns and there are building codes and requirements around safe environments for schools, and depending on the age range and so forth. But there are many alternative programs, for example, that take place in other locations in the town. And so there's a precedent for that. And this is a time when we're going to all have to be innovative as possible. And that might be, in some places, a very good solution where they have very tight space conditions within the actual school.
Great. Representative Brennan, you're up.
Senator. And Commissioner, you touched on this in response to a question by Representative Fecto, Representative Rodnicki, and Representative Drinkwater. But I want to just put a finer touch on this. And I appreciate your commitment to the 1% increase in GPA and a movement towards 55%. But it seems across the state there's been mixed reactions by local school districts and regarding how to plan for their budgets. And we've heard in some school districts have laid off probationary teachers or have not renewed their contracts, or that school districts are concerned or making assumptions that there could be a 10 or 20% reduction in school aid, and then making decisions based on that assumption. So anecdotally, what do you know or what do you not know what school districts are doing across the state and in terms of coming to grips with their budgets? Because obviously, no matter how this all goes, in September, I think we could anticipate there's going to be need for additional resources and staff as opposed to fewer resources and staff. And it would concern me if school districts are making inappropriate assumptions in their budgeting that leave them short of the resources and staff they need starting the beginning of September.
Yes. So anecdotally, it's interesting because I have not heard specifically the directions or the what schools are talking about with respect to their 2021 budgets, other than Portland, because it's in the paper quite a bit. So I'm familiar with some of those conversations. My recommendation to everybody, without being so bold as to second guess school boards and finance committees and town councils and so forth, is this is a time to invest in education and not to defund it. We are going to need more and not less in order to make everybody safe and to move forward with learning. And I know that that's hard to hear sometimes, but it also should be viewed as an investment. It's not throwing dollars to the wind. It is investing in the only chance we have for real a recovery from what we're going through right now. Education is the answer. It's worth the investment, and that's what we advise people. And we will certainly, have already made our intentions known that we are going to be holding very tight to the subsidy provided to the local school districts. It's our highest priority, and in the event that, if there were ever a reason that we would have to be looking and prioritizing, our priority lies with subsidy to the local districts. And we hope that the local communities, and as I say this, don't think that I'm just, out of touch. I also know I'm saying this when people have lost their jobs and they have lost their businesses and they're looking at a very challenging financial situation in many cases. And so I don't say it lightly, but what I do say is we're going to all have to pull together the best we possibly can and support our schools.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Rudnicki.
Madam Chair. So I'm going to kind of just piggyback a little bit on Representative Brennan's comments and questions, because with the state possibly losing between 500 million and $1 billion because of the shutdowns that we've had and the lack of sales tax and everything else coming into the state of Maine, education is one of the #1 drivers in this state budget, between that and DHHS. That's where the cuts are going to have to come to. So based on what you just said, are you thinking of any type of curtailments coming, in January, February, when, money's going to run out here sometime? And I look at it from that way. Is it all going to be back on the local property owners having to pick up the difference in the cost? And that's a huge difference. And especially where we've got a lot of parents that are going to choose, based on what I'm hearing, to homeschool at this point. They figure they've tried it, it's working, they may homeschool. And then that in the next year is the numbers are going to be down. So school districts may have gone up this year on their budgets or stayed the same. And if they lose a substantial number of students for next year's budgets, it's all going to come into play. So, I think that I would hope that the department will come to some sort of realization. I get it. I get we need to invest in education, but we need to come to some sort of realization that that's not going to be the case across the state, and especially in areas that have low socioeconomic areas. So, I guess my question to you is, have you been giving that a thought? Because I think it's something that we definitely need to look at.
Sorry, having a hard time with the mute button there. Yes, have I given that a thought? Yes, I have certainly given a lot of thought to the financial outlook, to the balance that we always, that balance between, asking communities to support the local schools and supporting from the state and as much as we can. And in terms of a curtailment, we don't have any information yet about that. I know that you can list indicators that would make us think that would be a potential, but we won't really know until the middle of August when we get a revenue forecast that demonstrates where we're at. And I have a lot of faith in the resilience of Maine people and workers and businesses. And I also have a lot of faith in the folks, my partners at the state, who have been working so hard to manage very well and very carefully and strategically the resources that we do have. And so I wouldn't be able to answer your question well until we see what happens in August, but I would hate to see the schools have reductions when they are going to be facing some of the most challenging times.
Have you given any thought to the fact that you increased the department's budget alone? Last year in the biennium, the department's budget went up, and with the number of people that you hired, now in this economy and the way things are going, you know, has there been any, I guess, any question as to maybe that wasn't the best decision we could have made at the time?
So,
and are those people looking at being laid off?
Right. Well, I certainly hope not, because we are one person deep at best in any of this. And thank goodness we hired and reorganized the way we did so far. We're still far behind other states who represent similar populations and financial resources. And so in order to have met this emergency with excellence in terms of what a government agency response could be, I don't know what I would change or do differently in terms of our team's capacity. And I can tell you that we have, just for an example, our Outlook has this little feature where there's an analytic that I can pull up that shows that I personally am working maybe 18 hours every single day, and that's everybody in the department. There's nobody with extra time. They are all hands on deck right now. So we've needed every one of us. And to be honest, I asked for more because we needed more, Representative Rudnicki. We needed even more, but we're all putting it out there as hard as we can right now, and we're trying to make do. So I don't think that was a mistake. And I thank you all for that support.
Okay, so we still have 3 committee members left. I'd really like to get through our full 2 rounds, and then I think we're probably going to need to wrap it up. So up next is Representative Ingwerson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate, Commissioner, your belief in local control. I agree with it. And while at the same time looking for and inviting collaboration among all the districts. My concern is a little bit about health and safety. Will the DOE or who will ensure that each of the districts is effectively meeting like minimums health and safety requirements if they're able to? And what will be the metric we use? Will it be CDC testing? Will it in collaboration with the nurses in the schools and health professionals in the schools in order to see and gather data as to whether a school is successful that way or whether that it's not working so well and other measures have to be taken?
So what the department is doing on the front end of that is we provided guidance and we are providing training, and that training will be ongoing for teams within each district who will be there. As Jonathan Shapiro mentioned, the collaborative planning teams, they will be meeting on a regular basis. They'll be the ones in charge of, once there's a determination of the level of risk, when we do eventually have those metrics, which again, we don't, those metrics will be determined at the state level by CDC and by MEMA and by DHHS, epidemiology team, the metrics of overall public health and how those drive the necessity of certain health and safety guidelines. And once that's established, those teams will analyze that. They'll analyze district capacity. They meet, and these do include teachers, school nurses. We want to have representative voice from as many people as possible who would be implementing and being impacted by these conditions that would be supporting everybody's health and safety. So really, that's the mechanism for an internal, ongoing check on that health and safety piece. Externally, there are some statutes and rules. There's like Chapter 125. There are certain health and safety rules that have to be met in order to gain school approval. So there are some of those levers. And, you know, we have ongoing inspections and what are they called when they visit the schools and check in? It's monitoring visits. And we have that across facilities, transportation, food services, special education programming, and a million other things. So those are all built in at the state level. But really, the impactful team is that collaborative planning team who know their community, their environment, the capacities, the facilities, and will be working hard to ensure safety for everybody. And the training that we're going to provide to those teams and that we've already provided and that will be ongoing, I hope will support them.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Fecto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've heard that the department's final return to classroom instruction framework and final guidance won't be made available to schools until August 7th. I'm getting word from administrators, school board members, and teachers that such a timeline doesn't work for them, especially given the intensity of the draft framework. So three weeks just isn't a lot of time to plan, finalize plans for teachers and administrators and parents to plan on career changes in childcare. So does the department plan on releasing some final guidance much sooner than August 7th?
I recognize the complexity and the need for people to be able to plan. And I am very sorry to report that there may not, in terms of final guidance, I fear that because of the dynamics, because we have a piece of this equation over which we are not in control, and that would be the trajectory of this virus, we can control to some extent our own capacities to manage it and to keep it at bay and to mitigate the negative impacts, but we can't control what happens with the virus. And making decisions too soon could be costly if we really locked it in earlier than, and I don't see us, this is the worst part, and I'm so sorry, Representative Fecto, I don't see us locking it in on August 7th. I think, by August 7th, we would be able to have the metrics down and so forth so that people could be planning, and it could be sooner that we have those. Given when we do have the metrics, and it could be in just a couple of weeks saying, okay, I'm not the health professional, but if we were, if we're able to list out for people, if in your region or community, there is X evidence of community transmission of the virus, or there's, hospital capacity in the event of a surge and all those different metrics, when we have that down, and that could just be a couple weeks, a school collaborative planning team could take that information and kind of juxtapose it with the levels of readiness that would exist within the capacities in the schools and could make a fairly educated guess. And they could put all their eggs in that basket and just plan A is where we're going. And then, September 12th, we have to divert to plan B. And that's the very uncertain and stressful condition under which we all are going to have to approach the future. We have to maintain a stance of flexibility and be ready to be nimble. And I wish we could say, here's how it's going to go, and let's settle into that. And that would give people comfort, people who have worked so hard, who need comfort right now. And yet I can't provide it. And I'm so sorry that I can't. But the soonest we can possibly get you as much information, I didn't say that well. We're going to get as much information to you as soon as we possibly can in an ongoing way.
And I just want to make sure I understood clearly. You're saying that in Section A, Part 1 and Section A, Part 2, where you talk about the downward trajectory or lack thereof, or the CDC readiness markers, that you're collecting that data and you'll have that data in a couple of weeks. And then you could basically say, if things stay the same or get better, you would have final guidance sooner. But obviously you can't control the virus, but you can control the data that you're putting out and best practices based on conditions.
So I'll try to clarify. Sorry, I must not have been clear enough. So we won't have the data unfolds before our eyes every day, sometimes hourly on this. The data itself, the conditions are changeable. The formula that we'll use to say, given certain data, this would be low risk, this would be medium risk, and this would be high risk. That formula, that matrix, if you will, into which data would flow and would produce a some sort of an assessment that it's high or low risk or medium risk right now. That data will change, I think, for many weeks and months ahead. And so I hope to have the matrix itself, like the formula will be there, the variables will be the virus and what it decides to do and how our state is able to manage it. I hope that's clearer.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to hop off of just Representative Fecto's question as well. And I'm going to break it up into two parts. We were provided a resource by the Education Commission of the states where we were able to gain some insight in other states' plans for reopening, or guidelines, I should say, guidelines for reopening. And Maryland's in particular was of interest to me, where they have actually already issued guidelines without knowing where they're going to be come end of August, September. And so I think my question, following the conversation that we were just having, is, can we not work off a presumption? So, plan A is this presumption that we open up with health and safety guidelines to this level, and then the guidelines could facilitate the districts in being nimble and responsive should the landscape change drastically, just in order to help provide some sort of firm ground for districts to be able to start making necessary investments and putting groups together.
Sorry, unmuted myself. Yes, we're familiar with Maryland's, and there are others that are similar, excuse me, to that. And eventually we do hope that ours will have some of those components in there so that it will make, again, Maryland and many other states, Arizona, for example, starts school far earlier than we do. So Arizona is starting early July. And I've been working with their chief education person and looking at her plans, and we're going to have a small luxury of a window of time to see how we have all of the state plans that have been released so far. So those are all available, and we're looking at, and we may have already made them. I think we posted a folder or a link to them on our COVID website. So you can look at all of the different states plans and models that have become available so far. We also have been looking at, again, European models and models from also Changsha, China, and from Korea. And so all of that information we're taking under consideration. Ours isn't finished yet. I think the fact that we had such a large group working on it, and also, I don't think we're not behind. I wouldn't say it. I'd say that this team worked, as swiftly as possible. But we also realized people are hungry for some more specific answers. We thought if we put the framework out there, because in Maine, not all of the states, of course, are local control. So in some cases, they put out the framework and the model. Schools will do this. All schools shall, do X, Y, or Z. We can't do that in our state. So instead, we're going to have a framework against which the individual districts can assess their model to see if it, meets these sort of requirements. That said, this is why we put it out there as a draft. This is why there's going to be a survey where people can put their thoughts in there and let us know, we really prefer Maryland's. Could you put something in like that particular piece? And And, you know, I hear you saying that, Senator Millett, so we'll take it under advisement, and we are going to continue to improve our model, our framework, sorry, not model.
Okay, and I know we are getting really late, so my follow-up question, or the one that's I originally intended to ask was, has the department considered offering districts a process for developing their reopening, the issues that they need to be considering, and the timeline that they should be following in order to put more structure around expectations from members of communities, whether they be parents, educators, town councils? I understand that there's this issue of local control, and that the net result is going to be a reflection of the decision-making process of those communities. But there is, I would imagine, a desire to make sure that all communities are giving consideration to all issues that the department and all stakeholders agree should be part of that process, whether it be family situations, work situations. You know, if a district is going to decide to go one day on, one day off, what does that do for parents who are trying to work, et cetera, et cetera. So is there any sort of expectation that the department will be put out there to districts that this is what the process and these are what the considerations should include?
So the process, what we've heard is, so we have made recommendations already around what considerations should be brought into the process. And in fact, that is built into our framework. I don't have it in front of me. So when people talk about, you know, bullet A3 or something,
I'm very sorry, Commissioner, you're fading in and out. So I don't know if you could just kind of, thank you.
I'll get up closer. Sorry about that. Am I okay now? So in our framework, we do address recommendations for processes that include communicate with these particular stakeholders, do outreach to families. That's built in as suggested recommended steps within our framework. We did not go so far as to require everybody to use the same process, because each town and community is quite different, and school departments or districts or LEAs will be working, and many already have created great processes to include families and students and community members and businesses, local daycare partners in their planning. So we didn't dictate what process they must use, but we created a list of considerations, as you mentioned, that they should take into consideration in their process. And we even go so far as to recommend, at this step, remember, check with your, custodial team, like rather than having people making high-level decisions in isolation. So we did put in some reminders and some guidance around that. We are happy to work and to continue to work with, we meet with superintendents and we meet with teachers and with curriculum coordinators and with special ed directors every week. And we talk about all of these issues, and we do make such recommendations. Those also are in some of our priority notices, and we thought it was clearly embedded in the framework in terms of considerations that you should remember that this and this and this could happen. We have a long way to go if the framework isn't yet clear enough to be helpful or useful to folks yet. Therefore, we do look forward to an ongoing revision and consider it a living document, and we will emphasize the importance of bringing families and communities and considering all of those things. Oh, also the Department of Education is meeting, it might even be today if I'm not too late, with OCFS to talk about potential partnerships across departments with daycares, private and public daycare providers, and being partners in whatever these plans do look like, and also in the event of a future emergency where we have to, in the event that we would have to revert again to remote learning, would there be a seamless way for us to incorporate and share resources with daycares to prevent the catastrophic impact that that the first emergency had on family life and people's ability to suddenly not have childcare. So we're working on all those angles. Thanks for mentioning it. So it's very important.
Thank you. So Grace Levitt, I think you wanted to launch off of some comments you heard today.
I was just, I forget now, it was a couple of questions ago, but just talking about the collaborative planning teams in districts and knowing that that's already started in some districts, is in process in some districts, and is getting underway in others. And just that, as I think several people have said, certainly commissioners said, the importance of all the stakeholders. And as you just also added in your remarks as well, Senator Millett, how important that is to consider all the possibilities and details. So thank you. I just was going to weigh in on that and let you know that some of this work is going on. And it really is great to have that collaboration, and it has been wonderful to have the collaboration with all the stakeholders that have listened to this too. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I think we're going to wrap it up. I know probably many of us have still some questions, but we are about an hour and a half late on our original planned meeting. And so I would ask Representative Cornfield as co-chair if you have any thoughts that you would like to share.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for their excellent questions and the department for all their work and their responses. You know, we're truly operating without the knowledge of what is to come. But I think it's very, very important to be as transparent as we possibly can about what we're thinking and planning. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Representative Cornfield. Commissioner, are there just some closing thoughts you'd like to offer?
I guess I would echo thank you all for your thoughtful questions. It's always helpful. And, it helps us to, you have your finger on the pulse of how people are feeling and where their anxieties are and their questions are. It's very helpful for us to hear those questions. And we were grateful to read you sent them in advance. If there were any that didn't get answered, we'll go through, see if we can't find a way to get, individual answers back. So thank you for your time. And I also can't say enough. Again, it's our Department of Education staff have been rock stars. They have just absolutely put every bit of their energy into it. And they've done, I'd say, more hours of face-to-face time with educators. It's interesting, as we are isolated, we're almost more intimate and connected in so many ways because it's so easy to hop on a Zoom. And I would finally want to thank our partners, the MEA, MSMA, MPA, MADSEC, which are the administrators of special services, the Maine Curriculum Leaders Association, and myriad individual, family groups, and our student cabinet, and all of the other people who have contributed to the work we've done so far. And we look forward to a future and ongoing partnership. And you know what? We're going to get through it together. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I just also want to extend my deepest gratitude for our teachers and our administrators across the state for stepping up in such a quick and unexpected way to support our students. And I know it wasn't perfect. I know that it was, the experiences of families and students were uneven. And issues arose here and there, but I'm hoping now that with this time with the department and its amazing staff leaning into what education will look like going forward as we continue to experience the COVID-19 pandemic, that we are able to arrive at some sort of understanding of what education should look like minimally for our students and for our children. I know that's very difficult in the environment of local control. We have struggled with that paradigm as an education committee, and how do you assure equity for all children in a local control state? And so I look forward to understanding better how that is going to play out in the months ahead. And between now and then, my deepest gratitude to the department and all of its amazing staff and all the work that you're doing. And my gratitude to my fellow committee members for making this work. It's really appreciate having the opportunity to have a conversation and discussion with the commissioner around public education. So with that, we'll end our meeting. Thanks, everyone.